of this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference, which is excellent because this is the 5th Responsible Raw Materials Conference that we are doing. And thank you very much to all of you who have dialed in now, and hello to all of you who are catching up online a little bit later. For those of you who have been with us, you will have been able to experience a wide variety of fantastic speakers from all around the world who have been sharing their thoughts, their feelings, their fears, and perhaps their excitement with regards to some of those choices that we can make within the world of raw materials that should hopefully make the world a better place, or at least make sure that when we are trying to provide or use all those raw materials and everything that we need round about us, we do so in the most responsible manner. Now, in case you're thinking, well, hang on a second, this is the first time I have dialed in this week. What on earth is Sarah talking about? Well, if you go to our webpage, and I'm sure a link to it will appear in the chat imminently, here is the webpage for this year's conference. And if you scroll down, if you decide, by the way, you want to watch on YouTube rather than on Zoom, then please feel free to click that button. That will take you to the YouTube page. But if you scroll down, you will find some background information on all of our lovely talks. You've then got our lovely infographic, and we are, of course, running the usual competition to tell us what have we missed. You won't win any prizes. Actually, you might, because you might get your idea incorporated into the next version of this diagram. And so what we've tried to do here is, of course, think about, well, choice. Is the world a little bit of a game? Of course, it's not all of a game, but we can make it a little bit more fun and exciting, but by perhaps thinking about it in that way. And we've tried to portray some of those inputs, some of those outputs, and some of those key decisions or points where we have a choice to be made with regards to how we're going to do things. There's lots that we're missing off this. I think there are some arrows that are probably could do with spinning around, but it's all good to get us thinking. Now, down below this, we've got some more information on what Responsible Raw Materials is all about. And then finally, we get to our lovely schedule where you can see who is going to be speaking this afternoon, which is, of course, Wednesday afternoon. My apologies for being UK-centric, but that's where most of the organisational team are. So we decided to keep it simple for us and be selfish. And the rest of you could just work out which time zone you're in relative to us. There we go. Is that selfish enough, Miranda? I think so, especially given that you're in Canada. Lovely. So if we click on Wednesday afternoon, you can see our fantastic lineup of speakers that we have for you here. The good news is that we've squeezed in extra speakers for you because we had so many people contact us to say, I really want to share my ideas. So again, there will be prizes or maybe points for those of you who can work out who are the new speakers that we've managed to slot into this afternoon's session. Now, rather than spoil everybody's thunder by me introducing all of our speakers, I will invite them to do so, or those of our speakers who have already dialed in, which is great, to introduce themselves in a second. But just in case you think, hang on, I'm really loving all of this and I want to know more, or perhaps the speaker is referring back to something that they heard yesterday afternoon or in any of the previous sessions, what we've got here, because the team behind the scenes are pulling an absolute blinder, as we would say in the UK, i.e. doing very well. And what they've managed to do is where somebody has given a talk, if you go over here to where it says learn more, click on that link, that will then take you to that person's talk that has already been edited and uploaded. And here with Pavel's, we can see we've got his abstract, and depending on what the speaker has already given to us, there may well be a biography, some additional resources that are loaded onto that page as well. Now, of course, this isn't the only year that we've been doing this, because as I mentioned, Responsible Raw Materials has been around since 2020, which is why this year is our 5th conference. If you want to go and take a look at our full back catalogue of all of those talks, just click on talks. And there's hundreds of hours worth of free TV right here, streamed specially for yourselves. So feel free to work your way through the entire bingeable 5 seasons that we will have. Or if you want to, of course, focus in your watching on, say, Mind Closure, then just click on that and you'll be able to see some of the curated products that we pulled together for you. Alternatively, if you decide that you think Ludovine is the most amazing speaker in the world, and you could be forgiven for thinking that because she is indeed absolutely amazing, just click on the little search button, type in Ludovine, There we go. So Ludovine was kind enough to give us a presentation on Monday, but this isn't her first rodeo. Oh no, Ludovine has spoken at a number of our conferences, and here is some of her back catalogue as well. So feel free to go back and explore all of this. So coming back to today's session, and I'm going to spring down to our little schedule that we have here. As you can see, we're going to welcome Sarah to the stage in a second. Don't worry, you don't have to be called Sarah to speak today, but it does help if you're speaking before 3:30. And then we're going to welcome the likes of Rodrigo, Susanna, and so on. But in order to introduce all of our wonderful speakers who have dialed in, I was wondering actually if our lovely speakers would be happy to turn on their cameras if they're here. If they're away doing something else, that's fine. And just say what's your name and where you're from so that everybody knows what they can expect. So Sarah, let's start with yourself and then we'll go to Susanna. On you go, Sarah.
Sure. Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm based in the US. I'm the Open Innovation Manager for the Countering Transnational Corruption Grand Challenge. I work at an organization called Resonance, and I'm excited to tell you more about what all that mouthful means in a moment.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sarah. Exciting. Susanna, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Kyle.
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Susanna Fitzgerald. I'm a governance officer at the Natural Resource Governance Institute, or NRGI for short. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Susanna. Kyle, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we will go to Carolina.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kyle Pierce. I'm the VP for Community Integration for Inspire Resources. And I'm coming to you from the west coast of Canada on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kyle. And Carolina, would you like to say hello?
Hi, Sarah. I'm Carolina Sanchez. I live in Argentina. I am an environmental engineer, and I am actually discussing these issues about critical raw materials and the opportunities for Argentina. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Carolina. And Rodrigo, would you like to say hello?
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, my name is Rodrigo Navas, and I'm the head of manufacturing at IDB Invest. We are part of the Inter-American Development Bank Group, and we are the private arm. So very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Rodrigo. Fantastic. And just so that you know who they are, Responsible Raw Materials Volunteer Team, do you want to give us a wave? Fabulous. There they all are. So that's the team that's keeping everything running behind the scenes, which is glorious. So for our lovely attendees who are dialed in Zoom, congratulations and welcome. This conference isn't just about sitting and listening. Oh no, we very much welcome all of your input as well. So you will see that you have access to the chat, you have access to the Q&A, so please feel free to share all your thoughts, ideas, any materials that you might have with everybody else. And this morning, for example, we had a really dynamic session with loads of conversation going on in the chat, not all of which agreed with one another, which was very exciting. So please feel free to engage in the chat. If, however, you are watching on YouTube, don't worry, you also have a chat that we will be monitoring. So feel free to engage with us via that as well. And we'll make sure that your questions are answered if at all possible. However, finally, if anybody is naughty, and you have been warned. So if anybody's naughty, what we're going to do just to protect everybody is to begin to shut down some of those privileges. And if everything goes really wrong and we have something like a Zoom bomber, the signal is, are you ready, everybody? The signal is this. Okay, there we go. Followed by a whole load of laughter, which is when things go really wrong. Now, what we're going to do is we'll make it very clear that we're shutting down the Zoom. You please refer to your emails because we'll send you out an email with your new details in it. So that is our mechanism through which we can deal with any Zoom bombers or equivalent. We've never had to use it, but we just like making the signal anyway because it makes us all laugh. So on that note, I'm now going to rescue myself by welcoming to the stage another Sarah. Sarah, as you've already heard earlier on, is going to share with us some of her thoughts with regards to this wonderful world of critical choices. So Sarah, I'm now going to spotlight you. If you'd like to unmute yourself, I will let you take it away. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to all the organizers for the invitation to share out today. It's been really wonderful to join the conversations this week, and I hope that it might be the beginning of a conversation if we haven't had an opportunity to connect yet. As we said, I'm Sarah, and I'll just start by saying I'm really glad to be thinking and listening and sharing with you all through this event. So I want to tell you about a lot of different things we've been working on, and I think I'll start biggest picture and narrow in as we go. So let me start by telling you a bit about our team's work broadly. So the Countering Transnational Corruption Grand Challenge for Development is the vanguard of USAID's bold new suite of anti-corruption programs and part of the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal. The challenge leverages innovation and collaboration to prevent corrupt individuals from siphoning off critical resources that are meant to be used for the public good. So the CTC Grand Challenge is a 5-year initiative to support local, regional, and global innovations to detect and disrupt illicit finance and trafficking of commodities, to strengthen transparency and accountability in global supply chains, to promote standards, practices, and norms that enhance integrity in the public and private sectors, and to address other significant dynamics of transnational corruption. So part of what makes a grand challenge special is the way that it leverages the knowledge and expertise of diverse stakeholders, including the private sector, including local actors, and hopefully as we move forward, including many of you, to support collective problem solving and identification of new solutions. So by mobilizing our convening power and networks, the CTC Grand Challenge alongside its partners will draw attention to the complex challenge of corruption and bring new voices to the table, building a coalition that is diverse, powerful, and agile. This Grand Challenge and its various activities is implemented by Management Systems International, that's MSI, a Tetra Tech company working alongside USAID, of course, and Resonance, which is where I work. We're the major subcontractor and also an industry leader in open innovation. So that's really big picture, but how does this connect back to our theme this week? I think maybe I'll build on some of what has bubbled up already across speakers. As a global community, we have an opportunity to harness the transformational potential of green energy technologies while avoiding the distortion of governance, as well as the environmental ruin, human rights abuses, and marginalization that often accompany extractive industries. So this will require preventing corruption from penetrating green mineral supply chains and uprooting it where it does exist. As many of us are well aware, key corruption challenges in the sector relate to a number of things. You know, it could be revenue transparency, it could be the awarding of extraction rights and procurement contracts, it could be the disclosure of who ultimately gains financially and whether those individuals are in positions of power or politically connected, governance within state-owned enterprises, supply chain traceability and data interoperability, the difficulty of due diligence for upstream supply chain partners, or limited local community engagement and oversight. In most cases, anti-corruption efforts in this sector will unfortunately face the same significant barriers encountered in other complex systems, including political opposition to reform and transparencies within countries with systemic corruption, a lack of incentives to root out, report, or address corruption. Maybe there's a reliance on self-reporting or insufficient accountability mechanisms, or just, high costs and long development timelines for more sophisticated protective systems. In a space with such complexity and such opportunity, the CTC Grand Challenge met the moment by launching its first activity, which is really what I want to talk about today. So in 2022, USAID, in partnership with Amazon, BHP Foundation, and Chandler Foundation, announced its first activity under the CTC Grand Challenge called the Powering a Just Energy Transition Green Minerals Challenge, which we fondly shorten to the Jet Minerals Challenge. So the Jet Minerals Challenge catalyzes the development, application, and scaling of innovations to counter corruption and strengthen transparency, accountability, and integrity in the global rush to meet the unprecedented demand for green minerals. This open call for innovation welcomed problem solvers from around the world to submit new ideas, as well as proven approaches to reduce corruption in green mineral supply chain. So of the nearly 60 concepts submitted, USAID, with the help of industry experts, narrowed it down to 20 semifinalists and ultimately 11 winners. So under the challenge, the winners are each receiving approximately $50K USD to $400K USD, depending on the point they're at in their innovation journey. So they're receiving that funding as well as in-kind support, including targeted technical assistance to implement their innovations. The Jet Minerals Challenge team is also working with awardees to analyze barriers to their solutions' impact and provide support for clear, actionable pathways towards technical, financial, and impact milestones. Some of our winning innovators are introducing or scaling online platforms that allow for safe reporting on corruption. Some are disseminating information about payments, fees, and taxes. Others are facilitating direct connections between small-scale miners and mineral buyers. Many are engaging with journalists or non-governmental NGOs, with local communities or other stakeholders to develop tools and processes to hold the mining industry accountable. So if you were able to tune in yesterday and hear from Rogers and Kaisi on the Fomona team, you've heard a bit about their winning Jet Minerals Challenge project and solution. And if you're keen to hear more, I would encourage you to join Miran's session as he shares more about Talisman's Jet Minerals Challenge project tomorrow afternoon, British time. These sessions, of course, give insight into some of the specific work taking place, but to zoom out a little bit, Jet Minerals Challenge innovators are implementing work in 15 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and targeting more than 10 green mineral supply chains, including cobalt, copper, lithium, manganese, nickel, and rare earth elements. Their work is geographically and sectorally diverse, with 4 innovators pursuing multi-country initiatives to address transnational corruption and 7 focused on a single country. In addition, 7 of the winning organizations are women-led and nearly half are local organizations. So our innovator solutions fall broadly into 3 tracks: constraining opportunities for corruption, raising the costs of corruption, and incentivizing integrity. So I'd love to walk you through all 11 innovators, but we don't have time. So I'll just take a moment to highlight a few of these exciting new approaches, maybe starting with constraining opportunities for corruption. So solutions in this track constrain opportunities for corruption by simplifying systems, by increasing competition on a level playing field, and by promoting transparency across supply chains. So to share more about what this means in practice, I'm excited to tell you a bit about the work being done by Manila Observatory and their partners GovData Initiative and Sustainable Development Strategies Group. So this project aims to increase transparency around the impacts and benefits of mining by creating the Community Development Agreement Digital Innovation Hub, which integrates a database of mining-related community agreements with revenue transparency tools and contextual data, and an analysis of relevant international principles and legal frameworks. So this team is focusing on the provinces of Cebu and Palawan in the Philippines, which are significant producers of nickel, cobalt, and copper. And they aim to facilitate informed decision-making and capacity building among end users. So I'll say this team has already been super successful in their outreach and engagement phase. They've included leaders and stakeholders from national government, from local government, from civil society and mining companies, along with community outreach activities, all of which feed into the team's research and capacity building plan. So as the team uses the results of their outreach and scoping work to develop and integrate their tools, there's certainly room to get involved. So special shout out if there are any user interface, user experience folks, or animators even in the house. This team would love to connect. So while this team works to constrain opportunities for corruption, other Jet Minerals Challenge projects are raising the costs of corruption. In this track, solutions might promote accountability and challenge the status quo of pervasive supply chain exploitation. One such team is Basis. So Basis is working to scale an existing digital platform for reporting on corruption in green mineral supply chains across 4 countries in the Great Lakes region of Africa. Basis will provide local actors, including civil society organizations, miners, investors, and other stakeholders with real-time data that promotes transparency, exposes corruption, and supports policies and guidelines on whistleblowing. To do this, they'll convene partners to raise public awareness through advocacy, capacity building, and training that strengthens the ability of stakeholders to follow up on complaints and use the data for strategic decision-making. This team is currently deep in the process of defining and developing their system requirements and system design plans. So if you are interested in app development in this space, let's chat. I'll say this team is also super interested in just general network connectivity to others, combating corruption and promoting democracy and good governance through citizen engagement mechanisms. So if this is you, I would also love to connect you up. I'll share one more example and then we'll pause for questions. But as we know, another way to root out corruption is to incentivize integrity. And this is the focus for many of the Jet Minerals Challenge innovators. Solutions in this track incentivize public and private integrity among producers and consumers of mineral products, cultivating a race to the top among companies utilizing green minerals. One team working in this area is the Impact Facility, whose project will address corruption in the trade and taxation of artisanal cobalt mining by introducing the Trust Merchant Bank's mobile payment platform to artisanal cobalt trade in the DRC. So the project aims to address economic disparities in the artisanal cobalt sector in the DRC by improving access to capital and financial education training. It focuses on driving local economic growth, job creation, and increased participation by leveraging digital payment services. This team's main objectives are raising awareness about digital banking, onboarding miners and merchants to the payment platform, and developing incentives for behavior change. So overall, this team seeks to reward ethical behavior and establish a more transparent ecosystem for all stakeholders involved. So if this is an ecosystem where you work and where you'd be interested in further engaging, if you're working on behavior change, let's link up on this one. I think that's probably about as much as we have time for today. I know that we agree that fulfilling the transformative promise of clean energy requires us to protect green mineral supply chains from systematic corruption. And I'm so glad to have had this space to share more about the Jet Minerals Challenge and the innovators thinking and doing things differently in this space. On a final note, I will say, I said this at the top too, but Grand Challenges really are unique in the way that they leverage partnerships. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have ideas or questions. I'll also note that we are designing other initiatives under the Grand Challenge broadly. So thinking about engaging in open innovation around corruption in carbon markets, around corruption in global health supply chains, around just doing business with integrity. So it's a great moment to get involved with our team if you'd like to be included in co-designs or contribute to scoping or share ideas across sectors. There's really a ton of opportunity for collaboration. So I look forward to continuing these conversations. I can share my email in the chat and maybe a link to our overview page if people are interested, and I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Everybody, please, a round of applause for the wonderful Sarah Binger. Thank you very much. Absolutely excellent. Absolutely brilliant. Now, Sarah, we've got a number of questions that have been coming in, and some of them are coming in on YouTube, which is very exciting. And the question from Yamikani on YouTube, they ask, can developing grading, certification and appraisal systems, which can enhance government revenue collection and increase miners' revenue, qualify as innovative strategies? What do you think? Or is that one to take offline? What do you think?
It's a good question. I think whether something is innovative or not depends on context and, what feels new and useful in the space that you're working. I think anything that is an incremental change, you can make an argument for being an innovative approach and a new way of thinking and doing things. So I'd encourage you to try it out and see where you can get.
Excellent. Yeah, because I know that sometimes we get a little bit pigeonholed in terms of what we can constrain as being innovation. So if someone comes from a very scientific background, we think, oh, you have to invent a new piece of machinery or something like that. But of course, innovative business models, etc., are just as valid. Is that correct?
Totally. I think we also often think of innovation has to be a technology or something really flashy and fun, but a new approach, a new product, a new program, all of these can be different ways of innovating in a space.
Awesome. And another question that's come in asks, in terms of that relationship between the innovators, let's call them that, and say industry, because often we need to get industry to do something or to change something in order to make use of this step change innovation. How has that relationship formed? Is there anything we could improve or learn from success that you've already had? What do you reckon?
Great question. I think it's a relationship that I'd love to continue to support building across these innovators. It looks and feels different in each case, of course. And in some cases, they have strong relationships, and that's where they're building on with their solution. In others, they're really looking for more opportunities to engage. So a lot of them have been doing user engagement and stakeholder engagement and outreach in these kind of initial phases of their products to try to establish those relationships, understand where there are opportunities and gaps, understand what's actually useful, what people are actually looking for. And I hope we can continue building on that. So if people are interested in getting involved, let's definitely connect and build those relationships up. It's all really supportive of the impacts that these innovators are aiming to achieve.
And Sarah, just in terms of your geographical scope and the intention behind that. So I think we've learned over the last few years and these conferences and more generally that the real prize here in terms of this massive change that we're having to go through across the world is if we can work out how to utilize our raw materials to actually unlock the potential for development in, say, different parts of Africa, as you've been mentioning. That's the real prize here. Are you seeing some of your innovations really kind of lock into that movement and those step changes, or is that part of the intention behind your geographical spread?
Yes, definitely. I think in having such a widespread, there's so much opportunity for peer-to-peer learning as well, in terms of thinking about what's worked in our area and our context and what could be shared or replicated elsewhere. There's so much space for the innovators to connect and share, and the broader the reach, the more we can think about different differences in connections across all of them. So yeah, that is part of the intention to kind of create this global step change for development, as you say.
And one final question that we've got
Sure.
here is, you mentioned corruption in carbon markets. Now,
Mm.
I know that there are a number of people here who are doing work in this because there's a sentiment of we don't want to have to pay a cowboy to pretend to plant some trees just so we can get on an airplane. Do you want to expand on what you're thinking in that carbon market corruption area?
So it's under development right now. We're kind of in a co-design phase. So if people have particular insights or ideas that they'd like to share, the focus again, it's transnational corruption and carbon markets. So shoot me a note if that's of interest to you all.
Awesome. I'm pretty sure there might be 1 or 2 people reaching out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. So with that, thank you so much, Sarah. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Sarah. Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to move from Sarah, and I've never heard anybody say the word corruption with so much glee, actually, but in a good way. So thank you very much for that, Sarah. That was awesome. And we're going to welcome to the stage the fantastic Rodrigo. Rodrigo, if you want to start sharing your slides, and then we'll be able to spotlight you so that everybody can see you. And Rodrigo is going to explain who he is, where he comes from, because Rodrigo has a slightly different background to Sarah, which is really exciting. Just in case you're wondering where you'll be able to find Rodrigo's talk afterwards, just go on the website, type in his name, and magically it will all appear. How are we getting on, Rodrigo? It's coming. I'm sure it is. There it is. There's something that's beginning to share. Oh, we can see the other version, by the way, of the slides. So we're seeing the notes versions of your slides. So if you can see the display settings button, we can flick it around. If that's not going to work, don't worry. We can live with this. Oh, there we go. Perfect. He's like a pro. So everybody, whilst he takes himself off mute, please put your hands together for the fantastic Rodrigo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for first of all for the invitation and for putting us in having this important dialogue, which I believe is very up to date. And also, I will start by a personal reflection on critical minerals. Climate change is the challenge of our generation by far, and we have to affect it. And we at the IDB group, we're not part of the mining on the critical minerals until we came to the conclusion that in order for battle climate change and put our thinking caps together, we need the minerals to start it. This is where all started. And doing it in a sustainable way is very, very important. So we as a whole group has been involved. Hearing Carolina talk about earlier, one of the biggest things we have been doing is working with governments, being able to do some good policy. And this is basically who we are at the group. And this is, first of all, the IDB, where we look at the public side of the equation, where the bank works with different governments and different policies, development, and the infrastructure, within the infrastructure division of the bank, there have been a lot of dialogues on helping our governments, national, subnational, and even smaller ones, develop adequate frameworks to start working. Why is this? Because some of these municipalities or state where the mining is located are very rural communities. And out of the sudden, because of these minerals, funds start flowing in. And this has been very important for us to work on helping create the adequate policies for sustainable extraction and mining to be carried out, and also to help with the governments with how to do with their money and avoid the big word our previous panelist, Sarah, was mentioning, which is corruption. When you are poor, all of a sudden, from night until day, millions or even billions of dollars start flowing in, you have to have an adequate framework to start looking at it. And that's our main key issues where we have been doing. The second part of the group is the IDB Invest, is where I'm looking and when I'm located and where I work for. And it's basically our mandate is to promote the development of Latin America and the Caribbean. If I ask every person here, I don't know, not seeing the count, probably around the 50 persons. I don't know, Sarah, how many people do we have online? I cannot see it. I don't know, maybe you can.
We've got lots, Rodrigo. You're good.
Okay, if I ask lots of people to put in the chat what is their interpretation or definition of development, I will probably get a lot of different answers, and most likely a lot of them will be correct. So basically, we have been doing that, looking at development from different angles, job creation, exports, innovation, climate change, and if you look at in the way of sustainable mining and critical raw materials, it touches a lot of that. Why? Innovation, hard currency, positive jobs, sustainable jobs. I mean, if you do it right, there's a big opportunity of us doing it together. And finally, the third arm of the group is the IDB Lab, which is basically our think tank, where we work with companies that are kind of disruptors in an early stage of development. We are bankers, and what do bankers love? Well, bankers love numbers. So here are a little bit of numbers of who we are. Our shareholders include a lot of the big European countries, but also most of the countries in the region, including where most of the big mining are: Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile. So we are willing and able to do business in all of these countries. We have been working with the region for over 60 years, and some of the things related to our employees' offices and our credit rating. Our value added is basically our sector expertise, our knowledge, and our capability to provide customized financial solutions, as well as advisory services to our clients. And the most important aspect is the one that says social and environmental value creation. Regarding mining or critical minerals, if you open any newspaper in Latin America, you will see some news about blockades, about protests, I guess people complaining about some different projects. And why is this? Because it was not done properly. It was not following the proper consultation procedures, most likely than not. If you involve communities early in the stage, you bear in mind what they're thinking about the project, most likely than not, you will get them engaged. Because all of these communities, usually they want one thing only, and it's to prosper. And a lot of these mining projects, again, if you're doing it in a sustainable way, they most definitely will bring prosper and jobs and opportunities for these communities. And finally, our capability as a group to have a public-private dialogue, hearing what private companies need in order to create this development, how we can be an honest broker, and to have an interaction with the governments to provide the proper policies to start working and enabling this development. Our priority sectors, again, we're very much keen on infrastructure, the corporates where we're located, and finally, our work with financial intermediaries. A lot of this can be tagged, especially with the raw materials, especially the infrastructure. We're not just willing and able to provide direct funding to the mining operation itself, but also to finance, and we have been doing that quite often and quite extensively, all the infrastructure projects that are part of this, the roads, the energy, the desalination projects for providing water. There's a lot of infrastructure around these projects that need and can be financed in a sustainable way. In terms of products, we basically can provide some loans, guarantees. I mean, trade and supply chain, these raw materials usually require some working capital facilities to go forward, as well as capital markets. And also, for us, moving third-party resources from federal investors, commercial banks, they're using our preferred credit status to work in countries that have challenges regarding the rating, it's something that we can do very much actively. And also in terms of advisory services, there are several of the themes that are key and very important to us: gender, technology, climate change, that we have a lot of non-reimbursable technical advisory sources and funding to make sure that our project can provide the maximum output and development in the communities that are working on it. Again, some of our business, we have been, since we started in 2016, as the only consolidated window of the IDB group, we have been putting close to over $50 billion in our assets under management, over 20 billion. And here are some numbers related to the amount of jobs we have created, that amount of tons of CO2 that we have avoided, and also the MSMEs that we have benefited. I don't want to toot our own horn, but yeah, we have been recognized by several different institutional awards because of the work of our sustainable work we have been doing with our clients and our partners in the region. And this is what I have with you, basically finishing up with a message to let's continue the conversation and basically reach out to us if you have any of these projects that you can think we can work on it. So thank you very much, Sarah. That's what I have for today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very, very much, Rodrigo. Absolutely fantastic. Everyone, please put your hands together for a round of applause for Rodrigo. Excellent. Now, Rodrigo, what you've just described is really exciting because it's actually quite rare to find, I think, an organization such as yourselves. Now, I've got a couple of questions that are coming in here. The first one of which is, as we try to redesign mineral value chains, Latin America is top of the agenda right now. What do you think biomarkets, be they the US, the EU, UK, should be focusing on in their engagement with these countries? What about things like governance, offtake opportunities, market interventions? What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Sarah. First of all, I will say all of the above. These projects are complex and they have a lot of moving parts. And let's start with the sustainability. In order to have a sustainable project, you need to have a successful project. And first of all, where does that start? With solid sponsors who have the most commitment to doing things the right way, the social. Some of these projects require social engagement that can last 3 to 5 years before even you move a single rock out of the ground. So it takes time, it takes patience, it takes a lot of investment. So these kind of projects are not for everybody. You have to have significant resources to invest, especially previously to the pre and feasibility part of the transaction. Regarding the offtake, yes, it has been declared by the EU, the US, and some Asian countries to be a priority to secure sourcing for critical minerals. So there's a bunch of things, guarantees. We have been working very closely with the EU in order to be working with I think can't remember the exact name of I think is Ludovic, maybe you can help me out. Something of the willing, I can't remember, of the people.
Coalition of the Willing, that's
Coalition,
the new term.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Coalition of the Willing, from which we are part of here. But yes, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of things we can do together in order to bring these minerals to our European companies, our US companies, and everybody's looking into that.
Thank you for that, Rodrigo. Another question that's come in is, are there other multilateral or development banks actually active in this space? And is there anything that we can be doing to change or improve their view about mining and minerals, to actually channel more responsible public sector funding to support this growth? What do you think?
Yeah, no, first of all, there are a lot of multilaterals because we are basically here for our clients to promote development. I know for a fact I have met with the IFC, International Finance Corporation. They have a dedicated mining team, but also all of the Europeans, DEG, Proparco, FMO, the EIB, everyone is looking to get with the right partners into these projects. And by right partners, I would like to go back again. There are basically, I would say, three things have to met. First of all, there are energy transition minerals. At least from our side, although gold, silver, iron ore, there are some things that they're important, but I would say it would not work directly with climate change. Second of all, what I have been mentioning, that they have the highest environmental and social commitment and ability to deliver. And the third of all, for us, all of us in the multilateral world, is that we play a role, that our funding is required to close a gap. It can be tenor, it can be country specifics, it can be tier 2 financing, it can be a lot of things that, but if the commercial banking can provide it, most likely than not, the multilateral will take a step back. And from the public side of the banks, that's not my area of expertise. Let me just clarify that. But yes, a lot of the way we have been working as a group and some other multilaterals, you start with the engagement of the governments. And the governments reaching out to us of what do they need. And why do they reach us? Usually because of some dialogue between the private side, the private actors, the companies, with the government to say, what do they need?
Thank you, Rodrigo. There's one more question in the chat from Dave, and Dave's asking, for banks such as IDB Invest, is the bundling of smaller projects into collectives to give scale and perhaps share some of those risks, is that helpful or an unhelpful complication?
I will say it will have benefits and also have some disadvantages. Why? Because it doesn't matter how, you probably need to do a proper social and environmental assessment of each project. So this will get a little bit more complicated because usually the kind of work that gets to make sure that everything has been by the book in order to avoid being on the cover of a newspaper in Latin America takes a lot of work. So there has been the biggest challenges, I would say, for the smaller projects.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And I've got one final question that's come in that is it's quite punchy, but we'll roll with it. And this question asks, so Latin America connects to every big player in the mineral values chains. Do you have a view on how some of these countries are positioning in the current tensions between, for example, China and the US? Argentina, for example, made some strong statements about reducing Chinese influence and pulled out of the BRICS after its recent election. Do you have any comments on that?
I will say all of the countries you mentioned in your statement are part of the shareholding of the bank. So we don't have an opinion on politics. We are here for development and not to manage. Everybody is aware of these tensions, but we are absolutely completely outside of those dialogues.
Beautifully answered, Rodrigo. You passed. So with that, everybody, please put your hands together because we'll save Rodrigo now from any more really nasty questions. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Brilliant.
Thank you, Sarah and Ludovic, for the invitation. And happy. I can put in the chat my email if somebody wants to reach out. I'm gonna give you this, and also I'm gonna share this presentation with Sarah and Ludovic for there to put it somewhere where you're going to put it. But anyway, I'll share my contact information. Unfortunately, I have to run to another call, but thank you again, Sarah and Ludovic, for having me. It's been great, and hopefully this will be the first of many contacts between the participants and the IDB Invest in order to provide sustainable raw materials to the region and to the world and do it in a sustainable way. So thank you very much. And you'll have my contact information soon. Thank you. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Fantastic. Excellent. Okay, so we're moving from that wonderful world of investment, etc., in different ways of doing it, across to the fantastic Susanna Fitzgerald. So, Susanna, if you want to start hitting those buttons to share your slides. We'll be able to welcome you to our virtual platform very shortly. Now, Susanna's going to give us a talk, as you can see here, which is entitled Deals Without Details, State-to-State Mining Partnerships and Their Implications. So with that, everybody, I'm going to let Susanna take herself off mute. I will spotlight her for everybody and invite you to put your hands together for the fantastic Susanna Fitzgerald. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And yeah, thank you for everyone for joining the talk today. So as you can see on the screen, I'm going to speak about the topic of state-to-state mining partnerships, which is a relatively new tool, innovation, new thing, I guess you could say, on the scene, and it might be something that a few of you have been thinking about. To be frank, it's a topic where there's probably more questions than answers still, including for me, so hoping that this could be quite an open discussion with everyone today. So firstly, I'm going to start by introducing the organisation that I work for and the work we do, and just share a little bit about the angle that we're coming at when we're talking about these partnerships. Then we'll go into a little bit about what we know, what we don't know about them, and then open up some space for discussion as well. So to first introduce the Natural Resource Governance Institute, NRGI, for those that don't know us. We're a research and advocacy NGO that focuses on supporting informed and inclusive decision-making about natural resources with an overall goal to advance a just energy transition. And so as the name suggests, we're focused on governance in particular, which we think is really essential for achieving that goal. Our focus is on the experience of lower and middle income resource-rich countries. So we've got 12 priority countries that we focus on across Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific. And with the majority of my colleagues are based in and from those countries. I'm actually based in London, which I realised I forgot to say in my introduction earlier. And so much of our work is focused on the policy processes within those countries, but we also strive to ensure that their needs and their experiences are better understood and reflected in global policy debates and in the policy processes of major markets. And so this is the kind of perspective that we're coming from and why we've been interested in these state-to-state mining partnerships that are popping up. And so to get into it, there we go, next slide. What are these state-to-state mining partnerships? Is kind of, I guess, to some extent, the golden question. It means strategic partnerships, mineral security partnerships, memoranda of cooperation or of understanding, various kind of names floating about for these, and we've settled on calling them state-to-state mining partnerships to just make it a bit easier to understand and to categorize them. Ultimately, what they boil down to is a form of agreement between two different states on this topic of mining, about exploration, processing these different elements of the supply chain. They tend to arise between wealthier jurisdictions such as the EU and the US that are aiming to secure the minerals that they need for renewable technologies, and we'll call them buying partners in this presentation. And then those agreements are made with mineral-rich countries who were referred to as supplying partners. To be honest, they seem to be largely driven by political or geostrategic needs of the buying partners, who are keen to diversify supply. And think we're all familiar with the geopolitical discussions that are going on right now, concerns about the role of China and the role of other countries and markets in this space. And I think that's what's led to this sort of flurry of new policy processes that we're seeing in Washington and Brussels and elsewhere. So these partnerships may lay the groundwork for future cooperation between different jurisdictions. They might incentivize buyer country industries to invest in a particular supplier country, or they might frankly just send a warning shot to international competitors, for lack of a better term, that the buying partner has an interest in this country and sourcing minerals from them. So a crucial point to note is that the documents we've seen are not legally binding, and that the relationship between these partnerships and existing trade agreements isn't particularly clear. So I think that's what makes them a little bit of an unusual animal to understand what their role is in this space. Similarly, the extent to which the agreements align with supplying partners' mining or industrial policy frameworks is also largely unknown. So while some of the frameworks for these partnerships are set out in legislation, such as the EU's Critical Raw Materials Regulation, the process for others and the content as well remains a mystery. So, for example, it's been very difficult to find any information about 4 partnerships that were signed by Saudi Arabia with Egypt, Morocco, DRC, and Russia at the Future Minerals Forum in Riyadh in January this year. But for us, I think the more interesting question, the harder one to answer, is what are the supplying partners getting out of these deals? There's a lot of language about partnership and about win-win approaches, but it remains to be seen whether these partnerships will actually deliver on this promise. And part of the reason for that is that there's just a real lack of publicly available information about what is actually going on, what these partnerships entail. So 22 of the 35 partnerships that we identified by early February this year had no publicly available information, which means that scrutinizing them is very difficult. This creates a significant accountability gap where it becomes very hard for countries' citizens and impacted communities, as well as businesses and other people involved in this ecosystem, to know exactly what the partnerships mean. So we're trying to, in a very small way, address that at NRGI because we see transparency as foundational, although insufficient alone, for better governance in the extractive sector. Because how can you improve what you don't know? And so for over a decade, we've worked to increase transparency and facilitate understanding of contracts and deals in this space. So first launched in 2012, one of the ways we've tried to do this is through our resource contracts website, which is a free-to-access repository of over 3,000 contracts and associated documents in the petroleum and mining sectors, covering 105 countries so far. So a key goal of this is to make publicly available contracts more accessible by explaining key terms and enabling searches for specific clauses on specific topics, or to help people to compare contracts in certain commodity markets or by company, all of these different things, all of the purpose of which is to make it easier for interested parties to understand if they're getting a fair deal or not, and to hold governments and companies to account in that. So although this tool has traditionally been used for contracts between companies and states, earlier this year we adapted the framework to allow us to upload memorandums of understanding, MOUs, or other relevant documentation signed as part of these partnerships. So as I said, there isn't actually all that much that we can upload yet. So this is a kind of first step that we're hoping to build on throughout the year and beyond, as we hopefully see more information coming out about these partnerships and what they entail. So early days, but nonetheless, we hope that this resource will be a useful tool for researchers, for journalists, for CSOs, companies, governments officials, anyone who's keen to understand a little bit more about these partnerships and compare and contrast their content. So if you go to the website, I can share the links to this afterwards, of course. And if you hit the search bar, if you go into contract type and go to transition mineral agreement, that's the way that you can find these listed. I should also say that the last time we did an upload for this was at the start of February, and this is a very kind of fast-moving environment. So there's definitely ones that we know that we need to upload, for example, EU ones with Norway, Uzbekistan, Rwanda. And also this is an open invitation that if there's ones that are missing, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to upload them if we can, if there's enough information that we can go on. So to share a little bit about what we've seen so far, across the published documents, we see that parties typically use similar language to describe the potential benefits for supplying partners. Many documents refer to technology transfer, to value addition, to ESG, the familiar kind of buzzwords that you hear in this space. But unfortunately, there is very little in terms of specifics of what is meant by this, and very little on next steps beyond what's in the memorandum so far. You also tend to see similar language being used across different agreements, which suggests there's a bit of a one-size-fits-all approach sometimes being taken by the buying partners, rather than thinking specifically about what different countries, what different mineral producing countries might need. It does seem, though, that the signing of these partnerships and agreements should be seen as a first step rather than a complete solution. So, for example, the EU commits to developing a roadmap 6 months after they've signed an MOU, although it's fair to say that they haven't always met this commitment, or at least they're not publishing them within these timeframes. But I have to say, I mean, I was at the EU Raw Materials Week in November, and this issue was raised several times by CSOs, and I'm yet to see much more appear on the website. So I can see Ludovine also shaking her head. If there's anyone who's listening that has the key to where you can find this information, please do let us know. And so, yeah, ultimately what we can tell is that for most partnerships, they will rely on their ability to attract commercial investment from the buying partner or its allies. And the main lever will be to have preferential financial and development assistance to create more attractive conditions for investment. But as I say, still very difficult to know exactly how these partnerships will work in practice. But that doesn't mean that we can just have to sit back. We can also be a bit more proactive, put forward some suggestions of what we would like to see from these partnerships. So I think one of the first things that is important, particularly from the perspective of the countries that we're working with, is to make sure that mineral-rich countries are coming ready to leverage this interest from countries and coming with a coherent approach to jurisdictions like the US, EU, Japan, UK, whoever it is, to think about how that they can use this interest to pursue their long-term strategy for the sector and for economic development more broadly. So they should target the buying partner's political, financial, technical capacity in a way that might be less feasible in partnerships with individual commercial investors. So this could be things like technical assistance on geological data management, financing around energy bottlenecks that make it harder to lock in commercial investment for processing plants, for industrialization, for other things that would be helpful for a country's development. To gain access to incentives that are offered in buying partners' markets. So, for example, the kind of things that we've seen through the US Inflation Reduction Act. Secondly, from all partners, we want to see better coordination and clarity on how these partnerships interact. So in some cases, we've seen partners come together jointly, so the US, the UK, and the EU, on their support for the Lobito Corridor, which is a route to transport materials from the DRC and Zambia to Angola's Atlantic coast and to markets beyond, for anyone that's not familiar with it. But in other cases, it's less clear if and how different jurisdictions are working together. And even within jurisdictions, it's not really clear what the strategy is. For example, the EU's decision to pursue a strategic partnership with Rwanda has unsurprisingly led to significant backlash within DRC, who they have also agreed a partnership with. And I think that's something that anyone with even a watching diplomatic eye on the region could have predicted. So thirdly, I think it's also important, and this is something that I think you will hear from a lot of civil society actors, for these partnerships to consider and demonstrate support for higher governance, human rights, and environmental standards, and for a bit more clarity about how they are being built into the partnerships themselves. So it's no secret that the mining industry has a pretty poor track record when it comes to things like pollution, to human rights, to corruption, unfortunately. So it needs to be clear how these partnerships are thinking about those issues, how they're being cognizant of those risks, and what they're doing to help address them. So, for example, there could be stronger due diligence practices built into these processes. There could be more capacity building and technical assistance for countries where mining is taking place when it comes to social and environmental protections. And of course, high-income countries where companies are based could do more to hold those companies to account for wrongdoing. And then lastly, I think we want to see all partners do more to facilitate the input of civil society actors and other relevant stakeholders like trade unions or community groups into these negotiations. So CSOs can serve both as a source of expertise and as an accountability mechanism to ensure that the supplying partner gets the most out of the partnership. They can help define strategic priorities, they can play a key role in monitoring whether projects meet international standards, and they can strengthen calls for partnerships to be more equitable. But their participation has been lacking so far, and to be frank, if these partnerships do remain political tools, then civil society might in fact find that their time is better spent elsewhere. So at this point, many questions remain, a lot left to be seen, but it does seem like it's an important thing for those of us that work in the sector to be keeping an eye on and understanding how they influence all of our work, which will be from a different perspective, of course. So yeah, I'll finish up there. I've just left some questions that I have, to be honest, for everyone that's participating as well of, do you see these partnerships as a useful addition to the mining landscape? Have you interacted with governments on these partnerships? And if so, what has been your experience? I think this is a bit of a learning process for everyone. So I'm interested to know what others are thinking of this topic as we kind of navigate this new tool. So yeah, thank you.
Susanna, thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant. Everyone, round of applause for the fabulous Susanna Fitzgerald. Thank you very much. I'm loving the fact that you've posed questions to us there. So that makes the next 5 minutes very easy for me. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we've received a huge number of questions actually in the chat, both here in Zoom, but also in YouTube. So let's go through some of them. But everyone who is dialed in and listening, if you'd like to address Susanna's questions, we'll also put them into the chat for you as well, so you can remember what they were. Please feel free to engage with that, and we can carry on talking in the chat whilst we listen to our next few talks. So, Susanna, the first question that came in was actually on YouTube. And this question asks, how can developing countries with limited expertise in mining, like, say, Malawi, fully benefit from state-to-state mining partnerships without being exploited? What do you think?
I mean, I think this is actually the key question, and it's not just for countries that maybe have less experience. I think it's also for countries that have experience already, and it touches on the kind of the key issue in talking about mining and talking about a just energy transition, is that there is a power dynamic that goes on, and there is kind of unequal relations here. So I think for countries that don't have a lot of expertise themselves already, I think that's where it's important to rely on peers, to rely on the expertise of those in academia, in civil society, researchers as much as possible. And I think many of us are happy to help where we can. And I think also learning from the experiences of other countries. I think this is why we wanted to upload everything to resource contracts, so that you can see what's being put in agreements, the kind of things that you should expect, the kind of things where you could maybe push for and ask for something more. But I do think it's also, there's a responsibility here for the countries or the jurisdictions, it might be a bloc like the EU, that are making these partnership deals themselves to do better, to recognize that there has been an unacceptable level of inequality, of exploitation that's gone on in this sector in the past, and to be proactive in offering things that could help a country. So taking Malawi as the question set out, that, you know, what does Malawi need? It's not a country that I know a lot about in depth, but if they've got concerns about, for example, the environmental impact of mining, or they need help maybe setting up a cadastre, or, like, you know, some of the more technical elements of that, what can these supplying partners do to support that as well? And I think they're the kind of things that people in policymakers should be thinking about as well, in terms of what is their offer, what are they bringing to the table, because there's a lot of geopolitics going on just now, and there's a lot of people competing for minerals, and in some ways it can feel quite uncomfortable, I think. So yeah, I think trying to think about those things, that's a quite meandering answer, but I think that's what I would say.
No, it's great, because I think, as you said during your talk, there are a huge number of these agreements or MOUs, etc., being signed. And I think anyone who's been to one of the big international conferences recently, there's always some big announcement that is made between two different states or jurisdictions or whatever. And I don't know, I confess that my reaction is usually just a slightly raised eyebrow and thinking, okay, well, let's see what comes of that then, because we haven't necessarily seen much action out of some of the others. But just to quickly dive back into the questions that are in the chat. So, question from Murray, who asks, how much pushback are you getting when you ask for specific agreements? Do you see difference between private industry and governments? And is there any push to get banks involved in transaction to provide the underlying agreements? What do you think?
In terms of pushback, it sort of depends. I mean, like, more broadly than just these partnerships, pushing for contract transparency has been a big part of NRGI's work, and a lot of the contracts that we have on resource contracts are because of advocacy that we've done within countries to support contract transparency as being being a stronger norm. I would say I slightly have the sense, and maybe the EU is the best example for this question, because they actually have a framework set out in which they should be publishing stuff. I get the sense that it's not necessarily malicious lack of publication. I think it's just stuff is really off track and it's really behind schedules, and they're also trying to a little bit work out what they're doing as they go. And I mean, that's just very much a personal opinion. There might be others who've had a different experience. I don't think I have too much to say on the other questions, but something that I've heard in terms of kind of like the broader financial elements is that the IFC's performance standards will be key for this kind of due diligence dynamic. So a lot of questions still to be asked. And I think, to be fair to policymakers, they also have these questions, and I think they're open to thoughts on how to improve things. So yeah, again, not sure if I quite answered the questions there, but I'll maybe leave it at that, conscious of time.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Susanna. I think we could carry on asking you questions for a long time. And in return, we will, of course, answer your questions too. So with that, everyone, please put your hands together for Susanna. Thank you very, very much. Excellent.
Thanks.
Now let's bring him to the stage, the gentleman who asked that last question of Susanna. So yes, this is of course Murray, who's going to come and share some of his fantastic thoughts. I know that Murray is now sharing his slides. They're looking beautiful. We will get there, and then I shall spotlight Murray so that we can see him in all his wonder. And as we can see, Murray is going to talk to us about critical choices, research, and future workforce. So if Murray, if you'd like to unmute yourself, I will spotlight you and I will ask everyone to give you a round of applause. Over to Murray. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, our former speaker, Sarah. That was fascinating. And what you're doing there, I think, is really, really important for the future, but I suspect will be really frustrating in the next couple of years. So I'm going to switch gears a bit and address critical choices and look at research and future workforce, which I think are very much tied together. Let's see if I can get this to go. Yep. So I want to look at innovative models for future collaborations. And I think such collaborations need to include partnerships with world-class research groups to enable better links along the entire value chain, from exploration, production, and closure. And really importantly, research in the future has to address the social aspects, which are really some of the most critical things in the mineral industry today. So important areas for collaborative research from my point of view, from talking to many of our industry partners and other companies at meetings and in all sorts of venues over the last couple of years, is in the exploration space, we need much improved understanding of the geological architecture of both mineralized and critically barren areas for better targeting across the entire exploration ecosystem. We need better exploration vectoring tools and technologies, and not just sort of the traditional ones in geochemistry and geophysics, but increasingly how we use all the data analytical skills that are just exploding around us in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Clearly, we need to continue the work that's been happening in the last 2 decades on understanding the elemental and mineralogical characterization of both the concentrates where we get the elements of interest and the waste that are produced as we do this, to see if there are any other things we can get out of those wastes that have beneficial and economic impact, or are there things in those wastes that are of environmental concern. And then finally, as I mentioned before, with all this research, we have to be looking at social sciences, humanities, and in fact the arts to enable a step change to the sector, and importantly at the same time, help us develop a new industry workforce, which also has this view about the importance of societal concerns. So I shamelessly stole this slide from Dr. Paul Agnew, formerly of Rio, at a meeting last year, the Amira meeting in London. And he actually looked at workforce, and I thought what he said was really good, so I'm going to steal it. He thought the workforce of the future in the mineral sector, the team would comprise sort of the usual suspects in the geoscience realm, so geologists, geophysicists, and geochemists. But the team would also have to include social scientists, community and traditional owners, environmental scientists, material scientists, mineralogists, which I actually would have put with the original team, metallurgists and geometallurgists, I also would have put with the original team, chemical engineers, data scientists, data engineers, and these should be with the original geoscience team and others, mining engineers, and a whole series of automation and mechatronics engineers. And the work he thought would be basically identify where a company or companies can partner with government and communities, understand what community needs and values are, do comprehensive resource and waste characterization, and do complex extraction simulation and process optimization, as well as understanding and modeling the carbon and ecological footprints of any projects from exploration through to closure. And finally, waste utilization and legacy valuation. So to me, he was dead on what we need in the workforce. What you see is it's a very broad workforce. So rather than the traditional way of building a workforce, which we're doing now, which is siloed, we train geologists, we train chemists, we train material scientists. We really need to look at building a multidisciplinary workforce for ensuring success of the industry. And we do that by doing research and doing education in multidisciplinary teams. So the vision I would say that we should look at the future is a tree. And to get a strong, secure minerals industry tree, we need deep roots. And the tap roots are traditional things, mining engineering, geometallurgy, geoscience. But the breadth of the root system to actually hold it in place and get all the nutrients it needs includes things like material science, chemical engineering, data analytics, AI, social sciences, humanities, and policy, and importantly, ethics. So how do we marry the needs for both research and a new workforce? And the obvious way is to work with appropriate partners. And so here I'm going to be shamelessly actually talking about my center, which is ICRAG. It's a research center in applied geosciences. We develop innovative science and technology to better understand the Earth's past, present, and future, and how people perceive Earth resources. We have a broad research portfolio, obviously Earth resources, which this audience would be most in tune with, but we also do a lot of work in Earth system change and Earth science and society. We collaborate with a whole range of industry partners in the minerals sector and beyond in renewable energy, et cetera. And we do have a focus on the global minerals industry, looking primarily at mineral exploration and production, developing new vectoring technologies, doing 3 and 4D subsurface modeling, petrophysical characterization, data analytics, geometallurgy. We also have a focus on critical raw materials by developing new ore deposit models for these elements and looking at where they are, their potential for both current and future deposits and in historic and present day wastes. Finally, we look at building construction materials, and with all of the above, we envision and examine the social and environmental issues associated with them. So I hope we could be a partner of choice for people listening on this call. We want to do collaborative research across the minerals value chain from exploration to closure. We do both single and multi-stake projects. You'd have access to world-class researchers and analytical facilities. We do embedded research. We design projects to actually match industry timeframes, and a limited time offer. We can leverage your investment. For the next year and a half, we can match industry research funds euro for euro. So you put in €1, we'll put in €1 as well. So I would say the time to invest in innovative partnerships for critical choices is now. That is the critical choice. Why now? The cost of investment is low at the moment. Reducing future business risk, especially in ESG, has never been more important. This prepares you for the future. And importantly, right now, it's counter-cyclical to the current industry climate. So while everybody is hunkering down and not doing a lot of things, actually investing relatively few research dollars can get you very large paybacks and actually put you in the right place for the future. Happy to take questions. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sarah.
Murray, as always, absolutely fantastic. Everyone, please, a round of applause for the fantastic Murray Hitzman. Fantastic. Excellent. So Murray, we've got a couple of questions that have come in for you in the chat. But the first one is, you have put on the table the most amazing business case, or value case, I should say, with regards to investing in these opportunities as you've articulated. Is the funding coming? And if not, why not?
So it's hard to say. I just actually have talked to industry about this in the last week to 10 days, and I have had no offers yet. Let me put it that way. I have had several expressions of interest. I will not name names, but some of them have come from players that I would not have expected, but ones who are looking to the future as opposed to what's happening exactly now in the business cycle. Some of the others that I would have thought would have jumped at it don't seem to have. So that's always interesting, and we'll figure it out in the next couple of weeks, why this is. This obviously doesn't just apply to the minerals industry. We're obviously talking to other industries like the renewable energy sector, the environmental sector, the risk sector, i.e. insurance, etc. We'll see what happens with those industries too. We haven't made those overtures yet, right? So it's going to be an interesting competition to see who wins, because I have 4.7 million euro that I can spend, and I can only spend it the next year and a half. So who's going to get most of it? That'll be very interesting to see.
Before you all rush, by the way, in terms of putting your hand up and saying, I'll help you spend 4.7 million. That's fantastic. With regards to this, Murray, there's a question here from Andy in the chat. And Andy asks, how can we build these multidisciplinary teams in the junior mining sector when all the incentives are driving atomization of the sector into tiny entities with very few targets each?
Right. So that is an issue. And I've worked in the junior sector, so I'm very well aware of this. I think in an area like that, juniors, one, they have to be somewhat trusting, which is always hard in our business. They have to work on things that are not incredibly competitive for them, so something that actually gives broad value to the group. So it could be, for instance, broader understanding of a region, right? Or broader understanding of a basket of technologies for finding a particular kind of deposit, which could be employed anywhere by anybody, right? Certainly on the social side, oh God, they all have exactly the same sorts of problems. Each one is individually different, but looking at it more broadly is something I would think every junior should. Boy, they don't need much money to try and get into that game, because if they don't do it, they're going to get killed. That's the way I would think about it. I think multi-partner collaborations are great. I mean, personally, they're a pain in the ass for us, right? Because we have to sign all these things. It takes forever. But the results are actually usually really good. We're doing a couple of them now. One in petrophysics, which is great, where we're just getting lots and lots of petrophysical data in the Irish ore field. No one's ever had it. Everybody can use it with whatever geophysical data set they have, right? So it'll be great to get all this data put into one basket that they all can use at the same time. So those sorts of projects, I think, we can do.
And so, Murray, just in terms of attracting funding, do you find people are more interested in funding the kind of the technical or the physical sciences or the social sciences? My experience is that a lot of the money tends to come in on the physical science side, and everyone goes, oh, but you also have to do some social science. And it's very dangerous to just kind of tack on a random project on the edge rather than truly integrate them together. What do you think?
So I totally agree with you. And you know that because we've worked on a couple together. I think, you need to tack the thing on because it's so important anyway. It has to be done. At the same time, what's really needed is really focused research on the social side, right? And I can tell you that's very hard to attract funding for, because while every company says they're doing it, one, they're not. Two, they're not doing it well. And if you ask the people who really know in the companies, they'll actually agree with that. And three, we can just see it in the headlines, right? But it's scary for them. It's scary because they don't know what we're going to find. And we could find things that they don't like. In fact, we probably will, right? But they need to know that so they don't make the same mistake going forward. Because in my career, I have looked at projects coming up and I can tell you that one's going to fail. I know it's going to fail, right? It's going to fail socially. And I'm sure a lot of you on this call can point to others that you've seen that too. We should be at least able to look together and figure out how not to do those going forward, right? That's a reasonable research program in and of itself.
Murray, perhaps we need the Murray filter or something like that. That would catch some of those projects nice and early. Murray, we've got another question in the chat that's come in from Matt, who asks, collaboration on research in oil and gas has always seemed a lot more open. Why is minerals so far behind? Is that deposits location specific?
Part of it is that the mineral, well, several answers since I've worked in both industries. One, the mining industry is just more conservative, period. And it's always been more, in many ways, technologically conservative. It's just the way the business is. It also tends to be more paranoid, of individual projects, because really and truly, oil and gas is a very simple system, which we understand quite well. And the technologies, once you develop it in oil and gas, can be used across many things. Minerals are much more specific, the deposit types, the places. And so it is really often, there can be real competitive advantage, which can be given away, right? So I think that those combination of things make it just a more difficult space in which to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, with all of this, Murray, and I'm loving the fact that we always get into trouble by saying that oil and gas is simple, because they don't like being told that. It's very, very complicated, and they're very clever people, but mining is quite difficult in terms of understanding what's going on potentially under the ground. I've got another question for you, Murray, that's come in on YouTube. And the question is, as one of the, so it's from an individual who is one of the few accredited gemologists in Malawi and Africa as a whole, with an interest in gemstones and critical mineral assets. And they're asking, okay, how can we collaborate on R&D with people in Europe?
That's a really good question. It'll depend on where they specifically are. Certainly if they're involved in a company, if they have any capital whatsoever, there are many places like mine, but others, where there's ways of matching funds or getting additional funding into research. If they're an academic institution, again, there are ways of writing collaborative research agreements with European entities, North American entities, Australian entities, South African entities, to actually, bring in some money to actually help with that research as well. So I think there are ways. It's just making the contacts that allow it to happen. But doing it, if he wants to, is somebody just going to invest for free there? Unless there's an obvious economic input, probably from an external company that would help do it, the answer is going to be, it's going to be tough.
Okay, so hopefully that answers your question in YouTube. Thank you, Murray. And then
have them contact me. I'll talk to them.
There you go. Contact Murray Hitzman. We will be able to put you in contact. And also as well, I know that the Society for Economic Geologists have got their big conference, or their annual conference, taking place in Windhoek in Namibia later on this year. I think it starts on the 27th of September. And this is something here where they're very, very keen to be able to support as many people from across Africa to attend. So if you're interested in coming and mingling with geoscientists really from across the world, then that might be something that you could look into as well. And again, reach out, and I'm sure we can try and put you in contact with where those travel funds, for example, I hope anyway, are being put together at the moment. So thank you very much for our lovely friend on YouTube. Murray, one final question that is coming basically both from Mark and Andy in the chat. And Mark is asking, who are the boundary spanners? And I think by that, we don't mean spanners as in the tool, we mean as in spanning boundaries. Mark, correct me here if I'm wrong. So who are the people who are spanning boundaries, and how can we support them in making knowledge more actionable in sustainability fields? And further to this, what value does the mining sector attach to generalists?
Okay, let me try and do the second one first and then go to the first, which is, I think, even more important. I think the mining sector actually does value generalists, and I think especially in the junior mining sector for the reason that they usually don't have many people, so they need some people who can do everything. And generalists are people who really can pull things together, so that actually can be really good. Repeat the first part again so I don't screw it up really fast. Can you?
The second one or the first one?
The first part
First
of the
one.
first part
Okay.
of the question.
Who are boundary spanners?
Got it.
And how can we support them in making knowledge more actionable in sustainability fields?
Right. So there are many of them. Satarla, who's putting this on, is one. So I'll give you a plug here, but it's true. I hope our group is one too. There are several other research groups around the world. University of Queensland stands out. A couple of others. There are groups within companies which are doing it, but obviously doing it in an enclosed and usually not very public way. I can't think of many governments that are actually doing it well, unfortunately, but hopefully some of them are starting to move that direction. I think the EU believes in that and is trying to get there. Again, they're not there yet, but the fact that they are actually putting their money where their ideas are suggests that sometime in the next decade or two, we actually might have many more groups that actually do that.
Awesome. There we go. So, Mark, I know that you've referenced a paper there in the chat to broaden out this conversation as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So with that, everybody, please put your hands together for the phenomenal Murray Hitzman. Thank you very much. Thanks, Murray. Great. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to do something dangerous, which is called play a video. Ludovine, I don't know if you want to help me introduce the lovely Carolina. So we have Carolina with us here today, who's going to answer some questions. But late last week, Ludovine and Carolina had a conversation in Spanish, but don't worry, we have translated it for people on this. We're going to play this video. It's probably going to look a little bit jumpy in Zoom, but we will make it freely available on YouTube, etc. later if you'd like to watch it at your own leisure. It's 11 minutes long. Ludovine, is there anything you would like to say before we get started?
Yes, that this comes of many, many conversations I've had with Carolina about Argentina and what's happening there. And the fact that we view Argentina as a great opportunity for the mining sector and mining as a great opportunity for Argentina. So we wanted to bring these thoughts to this conversation. And Carolina and I generally jump around languages, so we thought we'd be disciplined and do this in one language for this recording.
Excellent. So with that, Aileen, if you want to share the screen and hit play, off we go.
Thank you, Ludivine. Thank you for joining me in these discussions about critical materials and the opportunities for Argentina. Now I continue in Spanish, please. Sí. Argentina es el octavo país más extenso del mundo, con una superficie de casi 3.800.000 kilómetros cuadrados y una gran diversidad geográfica, ambiental y cultural, ¿no? Pero tener minerales críticos, como le pasa a muchos países en el mundo, en el territorio, no implica aprovechar las oportunidades que impulsan las transiciones energética y digital en el mundo. Incluso en nuestra propia narrativa nacional estamos más acostumbrados a la expresión proyecto minero que hablar de minas, ¿no? Estamos más familiarizados con la condición potencial de desarrollar minería que con lo que realmente está desarrollado. En nuestro país hay aproximadamente 200 proyectos mineros, aproximadamente la mitad están en una etapa de exploración avanzada y solamente 18 están en producción en este momento, 8 en construcción, 6 con las evaluaciones económicas bastante avanzadas, así que hay mucho por delante. Pasa que los proyectos mineros, incluso los de minerales críticos, son de capital intensivo, de largo plazo, de alto riesgo y requieren de políticas especiales, tanto en los países de origen como de destino de las inversiones. A la vez, la percepción del riesgo de estas inversiones siempre corre por cuenta de quien lo toma, ¿no? Los inversores privados de los países desarrollados donde se asienta la mayor parte del capital privado pueden no estar familiarizados con las economías emergentes y en desarrollo de los países que tienen los recursos naturales como el viento, la radiación solar, el agua, los minerales. Y los riesgos que perciben al hacer negocios fuera de su zona de confort pueden elevar las primas de riesgo, lo que hace que el capital se vuelva demasiado caro y que el proyecto pueda ser no financiable o que sea económicamente inviable. A su vez, los países destinos de inversiones, como puede ser la Argentina, requieren de considerar en su programación de promoción y su programación de política minera 4 pilares fundamentales, ¿no? Que es tener o promover el asiento de esas inversiones genuinas, tener una amplia visión lateral, ya que todo lo que se requiere para la transición no es solamente minería de minerales críticos, ya vamos a ver que hace falta algunas cosas más. Tiene que haber un marco regulatorio que proteja estas grandes inversiones que son intensivas en capital y de muy largo plazo y sobre todo acuerdos. Como todo en un mundo cada vez más complejo, los acuerdos cobran cada vez más importancia. Y a la vez, todos estos requieren de innovadores diseños e implementaciones para lograr alcanzar el enorme desafío de inversión que implica una economía global cero neta, ¿no? Sí, yo creo que es importante que cada vez se está tomando más conciencia de una visión más amplia del desarrollo de la actividad minera como un ecosistema para el desarrollo de las inversiones, ¿no? No se trata solo de minería. La minería en países en desarrollo se trata de inversiones en generación y distribución de energía hacia sitios remotos, particularmente en la Argentina. Los grandes proyectos mineros con oportunidades de maduración en los próximos años están ubicados en zonas remotas donde vive muy poca población, donde hace falta desde la infraestructura básica hasta las comunicaciones, el desarrollo de las industrias, los servicios, la digitalización y el conocimiento, ¿no? Entonces, el énfasis no se debe poner únicamente en cómo los países en desarrollo atraen las inversiones directas extranjeras para aumentar sus exportaciones, ¿no? Sino tener en cuenta todas las posibilidades de vínculos que tiene la actividad minera, en este caso de minerales críticos, con otros sectores de la economía que necesitan desarrollarse, ¿no? Yo creo que en Argentina también el agregado de valor local se debe hacer con una visión estratégica, considerando las capacidades industriales preexistentes. No se trata de querer abarcar longitudinalmente una cadena de valor desde el salar hasta el vehículo eléctrico, en el caso del litio, por ejemplo, sino de usar la capacidad industrial existente y desarrollarla para ser fuerte en la provisión de bienes y servicios que sean transversales a varias cadenas de valor. Entonces, esto baja el riesgo del desarrollo basado en un solo mineral usando ese mismo ejemplo del litio. Vimos últimamente las fluctuaciones del precio de los químicos de litio para baterías, ¿no? Entonces, es importante los vínculos que tiene la minería con aspectos fiscales, con aspectos de desarrollo territorial, con todo lo que es el aumento del contenido local, no solamente en la participación como proveedores, en el empleo, sino también en la participación accionaria que hacen los propios habitantes de las comunidades locales y impulsar el desarrollo humano y la innovación tecnológica. Argentina está en este momento en un proceso de bastante concentración del establecimiento de un marco regulatorio que sea amigable, que sea accesible para las grandes inversiones. Hay en este momento en discusión en el Parlamento un proyecto de ley que se llama Ley de Bases, que incluye un régimen de incentivo a las grandes inversiones, lo que hace es establecer unos montos entre los cuales las inversiones se consideran grandes a los efectos de este régimen, entre 200 y 900 millones de dólares, establece un plazo de adhesión de 2 años desde el momento en que se sancione la ley. Insisto que todavía está en discusión en el Parlamento, todavía no está sancionada, y que los solicitantes de este beneficio deben ser vehículos únicos de proyecto, titular de una o más fases de un gran proyecto de inversión, pero que debe dedicarse exclusivamente al objeto para el que se postula en el régimen, ¿no? Esto también pone unos plazos de desembolso de la inversión. En los 2 primeros años hay que desembolsar el 40% de los activos computables y hay una definición de lo que se consideran a los efectos del régimen esos activos computables. Y para que una inversión sea considerada una inversión de largo plazo, debe cumplir la regla de tener un cociente entre el valor presente del flujo de caja esperado y el valor presente neto de las inversiones de capital planeadas en ese periodo, todo para los primeros 3 años a partir del primer desembolso de capital. Ese cociente tiene que ser menor o igual a 30, ¿no? Toda esta reglamentación es a nivel nacional. Argentina tiene una organización político-administrativa, en donde el país está dividido en unidades administrativas subnacionales que se llaman provincias, y a nivel subnacional las provincias también tienen desafíos en el sentido del fortalecimiento de las instituciones para la gestión de estos recursos naturales, ¿no? Y acompañar, por supuesto, la protección de las inversiones. Ya vemos que va a ser necesario acomodar y alinear los plazos que tienen que ver con todos los trámites de permisos y habilitaciones para lograr los permisos de exploración o los permisos de construcción dentro de los plazos que establece también el régimen de incentivo, ¿no? Entonces ahí hay un tema de coordinación, algo decíamos recién, y alianzas entre la nación y la provincia, que eso se da en el marco de una institución establecida que se llama el Consejo Federal Minero, así que hay espacio para eso. Y por último, decir que las provincias son las que más cerca están administrativamente de las comunidades locales, y es importante que garanticen el proceso de participación de las comunidades locales en todo el proceso de evaluación de impacto ambiental y la emisión de todos los certificados y habilitaciones de la actividad, ¿no? Entonces, hay retos, pero están encaminados los esfuerzos para crear un ambiente afín al establecimiento de grandes inversiones. Decir también que estos regímenes que promueven estas inversiones son beneficiosos no solo para inversiones mineras, sino también para todos los proyectos de infraestructura, proyectos energéticos, la economía del hidrógeno, por ejemplo, que pueden desarrollarse en torno a las provisiones que necesita un proyecto minero. También hay que tener en cuenta todo lo que son los acuerdos interprovinciales para la gestión de los recursos naturales y para el otorgamiento de permisos cuando esos permisos ocurren en cuencas que ocupan 2 provincias, por ejemplo, o 3 provincias. Entonces ahí también tiene que haber una serie de acuerdos y de coordinación para todo lo que son los permisos, para todo lo que son las evaluaciones del impacto que tiene la actividad y el manejo territorial de la situación, ¿no? Entonces, todo esto es materia de discusión, es materia de trabajo en este momento, tanto al nivel nacional como al nivel provincial, así que realmente Argentina está preparada para los retos que se vienen respecto a las grandes inversiones en el marco de la transición, ¿no?
Thank you very, very much for that, not only on our technical team, but most importantly, the wonderful Carolina. Thank you so, so much. And yes, well done, Miranda and Ludovine, for putting that edit together. Fantastic, with Helen as well. In terms of your overview that you gave there, Carolina, in fact, I tell you what, I'm going to pull in Ludovine immediately. Ludovine, what's your key question for Carolina?
I have dozens, because I'm very interested. I'm going to take this opportunity to say to Jeff that we are a very inclusive movement, so we will cater to your language limitations. So Carolina, I mean, one of the things that we've discussed is that, you know, countries having mineral resources is not a guarantee that they can actually benefit from the energy transition. So what would you say are some of the key decisions that need to be made? And more importantly, is Argentina making some of them?
Yes, thank you, Ludivine. The first thing that comes to mind is to be ready to receive large investments. I'm not just referring to macroeconomics and the reasonable condition of a good business climate. It is necessary to provide sustainability to political conditions, as Rodrigo mentioned about the national and subnational agreements. Transparency, Sarah and Susana referenced this, promote constructive dialogue, meet the expectations of local communities, promote industrial networks with creativity and innovation, especially when the greatest assets of the country are the knowledge and culture of its people. Investment projects to take economical advantage of natural resources have a life cycle. They come and go, no? The capabilities, which Murray also referred to, and that are transversal to several industries, remain in the territory. And this is, and if these are cultivated, we will be more prepared to the future challenge and this changing world.
And how do you think Argentina is faring? Because let's be honest, a lot of us are looking at Argentina and hoping that it rises to the challenge.
Maybe I will continue in Spanish. Okay. Pienso que lograr estas condiciones no se hace de una sola vez o de un golpe, es un proceso.
Okay, espera. So Carolina confirms that she doesn't see achieving any of these objectives as a one-off. It's a process, it's an ongoing effort.
Por eso no creo que haya una medida que sea la salvación, sino que hacen falta esfuerzos, comunicación y entendimiento de todos los interesados.
Yeah, as we've established in many of these sessions, there's no silver bullet. So a lot of the effectiveness of any solution comes down to communication and dialogue amongst all of the stakeholders.
Lo que tiene de particular este momento en la Argentina es que esos diálogos se están dando. estamos reconociendo las limitaciones y estamos poniendo la discusión y el esfuerzo en solucionarlas.
Interestingly, Argentina would be ahead, definitely, because, sorry, that's my comment. What Carolina was saying is that at the moment, what's happening in Argentina is a clear acknowledgement of the limitations and the issues, but also a, I would say, dialogue effort, national and subnational, I think, towards better solutions. So creating the consensus for tomorrow, maybe, I hope.
Exactamente. Y esto se junta con algunos retos a nivel de las cuentas públicas y la balanza comercial argentina a nivel país, pero también algunos retos a nivel territorial que tienen que ver con el desarrollo humano en zonas de la Argentina que siempre han sido postergadas.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's hoping. So what Carolina was confirming is that, of course, all of this transition is happening in a context where Argentina is also facing the challenges we've all heard about with its, first of all, public finances, its commercial and debt standing with other countries, but also, and this connects to a lot of what we've already discussed, the issue of skills and human development in some of the zones, in some of the areas where actually most of the work needs to be done. So there's macro and regional issues.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're going to touch wood for Argentina and hand it back to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, both Carolina and Ludovine. I have to say, I'm very glad it wasn't me asking the questions just now, because you'd still have me getting the Google Translate up with regards to what the translation would be.
It wasn't an exact translation, but I think we agreed.
Awesome. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much, Carolina. Gracias.
Thank you.
Awesome. While we bring our next speaker to the stage, I just actually like to make a proposal. I'm just thinking, having listened to that translation, you know how we do the bursting the bubble session every year? Perhaps we should do another session, which is somebody says something, and then all of us get to say, well, this is what I heard. So even if we're all speaking the same language, so we're all speaking English, I think we all hear something and internalize it in different ways. And this isn't just because I absolutely loved Ludovine's reactions to what Carolina was saying. It was glorious. So thank you very much, Carolina, and thank you very much, Ludovine. So our next speaker to welcome to the stage is the fantastic Jeff Townsend. I'm going to spotlight Jeff, and then I will spotlight myself as well, because we're going to have a little bit of a chat, aren't we, Jeff? Which is very well prepared. In fact, we've just been discussing it now in the chat. But Jeff, we've known one another for a good few years now. And I guess we met after you had set up the Critical Minerals Association here in the UK, along with Kirsty, who we heard from this morning. And we're going to talk a little bit about Critical Minerals Association, but also other things that you've been up to as well. But your starter question, which you asked me to ask you, actually builds on what we've been discussing in part this afternoon. And that is, from your perspective, Jeff, and maybe you want to introduce yourself a bit more and explain to everybody who you are. But through your eyes, what do you actually think is meant by strategic value? But Jeff, over to you.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? That's about as far as I can go with that. Thank you ever so much, and thank you very much for having me here on the Responsible Raw Materials. So I'm Jeff Townsend. I'm the founder of the Critical Minerals Association and a number of other associations. Prior to that, I did about 20 years in politics. So I was born on a mine, grew up in mining communities, and then I worked in foreign affairs advisory stuff with governments around the world, starting in Southern Africa, Washington, DC, and finally back in the UK. when we were deciding the title, we came up with building strategic value. And the reason for that is, as part of the CMA and part of the consultancy work I do, I get asked a lot about, can we approach the government for funding? Why is the government not listening to us? And it's because the strategic value to the government is not the same as the strategic value to the company. So I kind of break it down into three, almost into a triangle. If we got too clever about this, we could have a dodecahedron. But let's just start with a triangle. And we've got social value, commercial value, strategic value. So I might offend a few people, but do we need all the gold mines and to be bringing all the gold to market that we currently are? Is there a strategic value in that, into building net zero, into defense, etc.? Probably not. However, if they're providing jobs and they're providing good ESG impact locally, then perhaps actually there is a strategic value. Perhaps there is a value to those mines, to the local community, that we don't see as Western political players, but local value is there. So it's in the eye of the beholder. And really, where I see a big discrepancy now is that governments recognize that their ideas from 3 years ago, we need critical mineral supply chains, are very different to, well, actually, this is the strategic requirement I have, and actually I'm going to be more strategic in the way that I deploy my resources. You look at America, yes, IRA's got all the headlines, but actually, in terms of making things move and making things easier to do, if you can get a DoD defense application in there, it's a hell of a lot easier because there's a strategic value. Where that flips on its head is sometimes you see the government saying, well, we expect investors to develop this because of market forces. Well, there is a gap between commercial value and strategic value. That gap will never be filled by investors. That's not their job. They'll invest up to the commercial value. They will never invest above and beyond that. That's not their job. That's not going to get their investors any money, or their shareholders any money. And yet governments sit there and go, well, we need this. We need this project for delivery of net zero. Well, fine. Then the government has to fund that gap. That's the reality. So I kind of just sit there and I think, well, we have to build that gap in somehow. For me, there are lots of reasons why we are struggling to deliver critical minerals at a time when we should absolutely be flying. But for me, that's a big part of it.
And so, Jeff, just to make sure that we're on the same page here, when we're defining that strategic value, is that strategic value meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, achieving the energy transition in the manner in which we desire? Is that what we mean by strategic value, or am I misunderstanding through the eyes of the government?
Well, again, I think it's different for different people. So, the UK government, when it talks about critical minerals, it is all based around achieving net zero or fighting climate change. When the US talks about it, there's a lot more of the defense angle to it, and their strategic value is there. And as individuals, or if I own a mine, my strategic value is to get that mine to be operating, because that's when I start making money, hopefully. So I think it's different for everyone, but yeah, generally in the West, and when it was first created around 3 years ago, when everyone started talking about this in more with more gusto, it was all about net zero. It was all around net zero. I think that is shifting, and I think that's why we're seeing governments acting in a different way. Equally, this year we have 52% of the world in elections. So I assume critical minerals will actually fall away, because talking about minerals and mining strategically during elections is not necessarily a vote winner. So the strategic value of talking about critical minerals slightly dissipates over the next 6 months, unless I can continue to talk and annoy governments into accepting they have to do it.
So before we talk about the future, Jeff, let's talk about the recent past. And so when you set up the CMA with Kirsty in the UK back in 2020, and I seem to remember, not that I was invited, but we'll put that to one side, you had a launch event in the Houses of Parliament just before COVID properly took hold in this country. And I think that this was something here where actually for the first time in maybe 40 years, people actually started to use that word mining in UK government, because of course, historically, that is something where there were big strikes, etc., that happened in the 1980s. So from a political perspective, if you were a politician, talking about mining maybe wasn't all that savvy. How did you manage to get the momentum and the buy-in to even set up the Critical Minerals Association here in the UK when it came from that base of people not even wanting to acknowledge that mining is a thing?
Sheer bloody mindedness, mostly. So I started talking to the government about critical minerals in 2013, 2014. And for a long time, there was just, we don't need to talk about this at all. In 2015, I'm telling the government, you're going to have a problem with China. They're like, well, why? We're in the golden relationship. You're misreading the room. I'm like, no, you're misreading what's going to happen in the next 10 years, and this is why. So they went away, and the government spoke to a couple of automotive companies, and they spoke to a couple of the big major mining companies. They came back to me and they said, no, Jeff, you're wrong. We've spoken to these companies, and they say there is no problem whatsoever. And I turned around and I said, well, okay, why would an automotive company tell you it's got a problem with its supply chain? Because if that gets out and governments are leaky, then share prices drop. So you're not going to do that if they knew in the first place. And number two, the majors weren't involved in critical minerals at the time. Critical minerals still to this day is predominantly junior companies or up to mid cap. So we felt we had to give industry a voice. And we felt like, the industry cares, very smart people, but there is a different language used between politicians and the industry. So we created an association to give these smaller players the same voice that a Rio Tinto or an Anglo American would have, just by having sheer numbers. I'm very lucky. I knew a lot of the players in the political sphere in the UK, but also around the world, just from decades of doing stuff in that space. So and being born in the mines and growing up in the mines, I absolutely love the mining sector. It is what makes me me. So I felt like I was in a unique position at the time where I could listen and bring the industry along, because I, to an extent, am seen as one of them. But equally, I can go into Parliament and I can be seen as one of them as well. And there was that trust, and we built that bridge on trust, and that still exists, which is great. Just shy of 50 or maybe 50 members now in the UK, but CMA Australia, CMA USA, C2M2A over in Canada, all brought together through the Critical Minerals International Alliance. We got all the acronyms. It's what we do. So I think, really timing was good. Knowledge of who the players are and how Parliament works and the language used, but equally the industry recognizing that, yes, okay, here's someone who can do that and has a desire to do it. And I was very lucky that, so Kirsty and I worked for the same company, and I said to Kirsty, look, I'm going to do this. Do you want to come along and help? Which is brilliant, because I can do the high level stuff. Kirsty could organize an empty desk. She's just got an incredible ability to make high level thoughts into actionable stuff, which is absolutely needed. So we have perfect alignment there. So yeah, it was a jump of faith, but it worked. And I think it worked because we delivered quite a lot during those first 2 years. And people saw a lot of movement, which was great. And, we have the buy-in now. There was a debate in Parliament last week, and the minister, the shadow minister, 2 MPs all mentioned that they listen to the Critical Minerals Association, where they get their information from. So, all sides, let's keep on doing the hard work.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, Jeff, on what you've managed to build there, especially that I think that bridge between these different groups who, previous to what you've set up, perhaps had no idea on how to communicate with one another or to reach out and try and build things together. Now, we've had a lot of discussion this week already about different strategic plans or critical raw materials acts, etc. And there are some that are perhaps better, some that could maybe do with some improvements around the world in terms of where we're moving towards. But this space, it is moving so quickly, and there's a huge number of people involved, perhaps especially from the governance perspective and government, who are totally new to the world of minerals, raw materials, mining, the circular economy, all of that. How do you see that evolving at the moment in terms of the awareness of what is actually important, and then people being put in the position of having to make critical choices who, to be brutally honest, don't really know what they're talking about?
Right. In terms of not knowing what they're talking about, that's on us. That's our job as an industry and as the CMA and others, is to provide that information, that understanding. Satala, you guys have given educational courses to 100+ civil servants. So, there is work ongoing in there. I always harken back to Knox Darcy. So Knox Darcy was a Queensland mining magnate, sold everything. He said there's oil in Iran, and everyone went, no, you're mad. He almost bankrupted himself looking for oil in Iran. Went to the UK government. They said, no, what do we need it for? Eventually, 2 weeks before he went bankrupt, he struck oil. And he struck so much oil that he was laughing, and suddenly everyone needed oil, everyone wanted oil. The UK government then basically turned it into British Petroleum. Why is that important? Oil has dominated in the industrial space for the last 100 years. But talking about strategic benefit, UK warships in the First World War used oil instead of coal, and actually gave them faster turning speeds and faster maneuverability. So it gave us a strategic benefit in battle as well. And that's all because one guy decided, well, now I'm going to do this against the advice of all the governments. So my point is, it's upon us to drive that, because governments move slowly. Their strategic value is different to ours. I'd like to see a mine built somewhere, run properly, local communities benefit. Multiplier effect is awesome. Infrastructure built around that. I see the developmental benefit to that as much as I do the commercial value to that. But if that offtake is not coming to the UK or to another, whatever nation it may be, they would see no strategic value in that. And that's where we need to, there's always going to be a difference. It's how do you align the two?
So bringing that strategic value and that commercial value, and perhaps in that commercial space, or getting the finance to the right point. I mean, there are lots of people here dialed into this session who have got phenomenal projects, etc. But can they get the investors to go, yes, I will come with you on this journey? Is there anything developing at the moment, Jeff, that's a bit more coming from the government side, trying to align some of that financing that is needed to unlock some of that strategic potential? Are you aware of anything in that space?
So there's a lot of finance out there from governments, as long as you meet their strategic requirements. Where there is a massive or lack of finance is in the exploration stage. And governments are reluctant to put money in there to the levels that are required to get them up to operation, because the risk is high, the jurisdictions are difficult, etc., etc. I was asked by the Department of Energy in the States to bring together finance and find an innovative way to finance these problems. And we put a whole bunch of people from finance together, and they came up with all the solutions that currently exist, because why wouldn't you? They exist for a good reason. And they weren't going to solve the problem. And then I came up with a slightly bonkers idea. I just felt like I had to respond to the DOE. I felt if I didn't, I'd get in trouble. So I put this bonkers idea on the table, and they loved it. They were like, this is crazy, but we can't see a flaw in it. So we'd like to deliver it. The UK government has said that they would like it delivered, and the Aussies have said they would like it delivered as well. So starting to grow into an MSP solution for this first stage. And the reality is, if we're going to meet net zero, it's that exploration stage that we need to solve, because some say it's 12 years from exploration to bankable feasibility. Some say 17 years. Either way, all of that is far too long. So we need to get that exploration. If we're going to get minerals or materials into the market quickly enough to build renewable energy, etc., to fight net zero climate change. And I still hold hope that we can do that, although, I might be one of the few ones who haven't quite given up on 2050 yet. Then we need to shorten that bridge, which means we need to finance, because I don't believe that it's down to the length of time it takes to do a bankable feasibility. It's down to how quickly you can finance a bankable feasibility. And if we can shorten that time, then that is the way that we are going to do this. And if we can do that, and we can build it alongside world-class ESG, then when it gets to institutional investors, what we're doing is we're handing over a ready-made project, world-class ESG, shortened time, backing of major governments, if not in cash, at least in word. And that's kind of where we sit at the moment. So we've got a call on Friday, and maybe Q3 we'll start to see this new vehicle take shape and start to deliver in that space.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, let's hope that this new endeavour where you've actually decided to go, hang on, let's step up and put a model of some sort on the table that we can explore, is going to be as rewarding as that gentleman who decided, no, he was still going to continue to look for those rocks in Iran, or whatever analogy you want to make. One final question for you, Jeff, and it just comes back to the world of elections, not least, of course, because many of us will be going to the polling stations here in the UK tomorrow for the local elections. At some point in time, there will be a general election. We'll see when that comes. But there was a question from Murray earlier on, and he asked, can you think of any jurisdiction in the world where actually people would talk about mining to win that strategic value within an election?
Australia, Canada, straight off the bat. So certainly in those two jurisdictions, if you use the right narrative, they're winners. And it may not be at a federal level, it may be at a state level. But they're there. South Africa, again, flip it on its head, but there's definitely a narrative there. It may not be positive. But actually, you start to see a big disconnect in this. So places like the UK and the EU, when it gets to this kind of stuff, you just stick your head below the parapet and ride it out. Australia, if you get it right, this is a big driver for the economy. They'll do it. And sadly, I see it too often where my original work was in Africa. As soon as you get into trouble, start talking about nationalizing. Whether you do or you don't, you start that dialogue, and that usually helps you along in the polls.
Brilliant. Well, with that, Jeff, and that advice to our lovely politicians for when the time comes for various elections, thank you so much, Jeff. I've lost track of the questions and the chat that is going on alongside all of this, but it's brilliant. I'm sure that Jeff will be able to answer some more of your questions. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Jeff Townsend. Thank you very much. Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Brilliant. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker, we are going to welcome to the stage the fantastic Kyle, who works with, you remember from 2 days ago, we had that eminently quotable individual called Andy Reynolds. Well, we're all quite jealous of Kyle because Kyle gets to work with Andy on quite a regular basis. So Kyle, if you've got anything you want to share, now is a good time to begin to click buttons. If not, I shall just spotlight you and then welcome you to the stage. Thank you very much, everybody. Please put your hands together for the wonderful Kyle Pearce. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And to use another phrase from the UK, now for something completely different. So thank you to Sarah and your team for putting on this excellent conference. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Kyle Pearce. I'm VP for Community and Community Integration for Inspire Resources. And I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, otherwise known as Vancouver, BC. And today, I would like to provide what I would call a non-technical briefing. It's really part observation, part research, part integration. And our brief journey will start with British Columbia's adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and what's happening now. We'll discuss the gap between the expectations or hopes of miners and those of First Nations. We'll situate this in the context of the historical and contemporary legacy of colonialism in Canada. And we'll discuss strategies to understand how many in the mining industry see these changes and how we can leverage UNDRIP for greater and more meaningful change. Okay, so FPIC, or Free, Prior, and Informed Consent, is a core element of UNDRIP, which stands for the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. In Canada, the federal government has a constitutional duty that predates UNDRIP to consult Indigenous groups and First Nations when their treaty rights may be affected by development. And by contrast, UNDRIP holds that governments must obtain free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories or other resources. So it's a broader sense of consent and for a broader range of purposes. So BC was the first jurisdiction in Canada to adopt UNDRIP, and the province's intention to implement it was signaled by the passing of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and the related plan, which sets out the existing laws that will be aligned with UNDRIP. Now, one of those laws relates to the way that miners can stake a claim in BC. And currently, virtually anybody with a computer and $60 can stake a claim anywhere in the province, including on traditional and treaty territories. That's called the Provincial Mineral Tenure Act. Now, last year, two First Nations, the Gitxaala and Ahatasat, took the government to court asking for the standard of FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, to be applied when a claim is staked. Now, they didn't win that decision, but the court agreed that the current system violates the federal government's duty to consult. And the court gave the province 18 months to rewrite the Mineral Tenure Act in consultation with First Nations and industry partners. Now, while this process is underway, a dialogue has opened up about what this could mean. So we'll talk about industry expectations. First of all, the mining industry hopes to see incremental progress. Things like earlier and meaningful consultation, faster permitting, maintenance of what's been traditionally seen as the balance between the interests of First Nations and companies. And they probably hope that the federal and provincial government's interest in critical minerals will continue to ensure that it'll be easy to stake and explore claims. Miners are most comfortable with government determining the terms of participation, decision-making, and permitting. Now, an alternative perspective is also developing. This list of expectations comes from the BC First Nations Energy and Mining Council, as well as dialogue with Indigenous miners and allies that we at Inspire Resources hosted in 2023. So this list includes what I would call qualitative changes, such as veto powers for First Nations, profit sharing directly based on cash flows, rethinking the economics and purpose of mining to include long-term sustainable community development, and full participation in permitting, as well as capacity giving resources to First Nations so they have the capacity to do this work. Now, there is a qualitative difference between what industry hopes and the expectations of First Nations. First Nations want a much more expansive requirement for consent and are seeking to have more control over what happens in their territories. They want significant economic benefits without the environmental damage. So how do we reconcile these two different sets of expectations? And how do we manage the risk that is inherent in the conflict between the two? At the end of the day, many in the industry want check boxes, and instead we'll probably need to unlearn what we've learned, especially the biases that contribute to the gap that we're seeing. We'll also need to practice new ways of thinking and interacting. Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, details how in the United States, many poor white people make decisions based on racism that reduce their own quality of living. So she uses examples of white workers voting against a union because they perceived that Black workers would benefit. Or the destruction of public swimming pools during desegregation because they would allow Black people to swim together with white people, of course, eliminating the swimming pool for white people as well. So any change requires that we unlearn a dominant multiple model. And many of us believe that we live in a zero-sum world. That's what the title refers to, that there are winners and losers in mining, that gaining an advantage is done to the disadvantage of others. And we see that companies resist transparency and community control. So this is a colonial mentality, and it's reinforced by prejudices and biases we've learned. So how do we shift to a non-zero-sum world? I'll talk briefly about this social media trend right now called Bear versus Man. Some of you may have heard about it. It goes like this. Ask a man this question. If you had a daughter or a female partner or spouse and she was left in the forest, would you rather she be left with a bear or a man? Ask a woman, and you'll usually get a very different answer. So this is the big conversation in social media around bear versus man. It's an exercise designed to elicit understanding among men of the danger that men pose to women. It's helped some men to come to the realization that even we, as a man, speaking as a man, get that men are a worse danger to women than wild animals. The statistics bear that out, and in conversations, however, your mileage may vary. It also shows that the differential understanding of power comes from different experiences of power. So the kind of changes that Indigenous people want to see with UNDRIP are driven by their experience of centuries of colonization. We need to find ways to bridge the gap so that miners can understand the power differential between colonial systems and Indigenous systems, and questions that draw our attention to the implicit understanding of power, like the bear versus man question, can help. Other strategies for reconciling worldviews. Well, Daniel Francis's book, The Imaginary Indian, details the way that Indigenous people have been represented to reinforce the legitimacy of discrimination against and control over Indigenous people here in Canada. It challenges us to confront the formation and maintenance of discriminatory attitudes about Indigenous people. Now, most of us here in the Responsible Raw Materials community have had some revelation, I suspect, in our life that has driven us to embrace the kind of change that we're talking about today. Other ways we can help others in the industry are to ask reflective questions or conduct thought experiments. So reflective questions can help people to become more open or vulnerable, and through sharing in a safe environment, we can move through a critical reflection on our formative experiences. Thought experiments are ways of imagining a different world and activating the cerebral cortex instead of the amygdala. They don't require the same level of safety, but they do require someone to push us towards rigorous thinking and discussion. So I want to pose a question to all of you for silent reflection, or if you want to put your response in the chat. What personal experience did you have that changed your perspective on mining so that you now embrace a different vision for the industry? Okay, there's so many issues to unpack with FPIC, and I just want to highlight 3 of them here as we wrap this up. One is, our relationship to each other. Mining companies have come to rely on certainty, and certainty means control. We, meaning people like me with an English and French background here in Canada, have exercised control through a dominant and dominating set of laws and rules. Western and Indigenous conceptions of our relationship with the land are pretty much oppositional. In my culture, land's something to be owned exclusively for personal benefit or economic value. Many Indigenous cultures see themselves as part of a web that is connected to the land, water, and air. The relationship is dynamic and multi-directional. A benefit to one is a benefit to all. And finally, we've created a zero-sum world where basic needs even are only available to those with the means to pay for them. So if we are able to go down this road to decolonizing mining and bringing in FPIC, we believe, if we rethink our relationship with rights holders and shareholders, we can also rethink our relationships with our companies, the land, and shift the context in the industry. It requires some internal thinking, so that bear versus man question is germane to mining. Mining has a terrible record of recruiting and retaining women workers. A lot of reasons are because the glass ceiling, but many women that I've spoken with feel fearful in many working situations in the industry. So we can boost recruitment and retention by building a sense of belonging for all workers. We can expedite the development of resources and reduce the number of abandoned mine claims. And we can achieve true sustainability, not just for global economy, but also for small communities. This is what Heather McGhee refers to as the solidarity dividend, the improvements that come from unlearning our biases and prejudices, and then aligning our laws, policies, and institutions with them. And that is my presentation. I just need to figure out how to stop sharing here.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Kyle. Round of applause, everybody, for Kyle. And Kyle, you'll be glad to know that we've begun to get some answers to your question in the chat already. I think, Kyle, just a reflection from me. So when you were talking about that bear or man question, I confess I haven't heard of this yet, and it's floored me at the moment. And I think looking at Ludovine's face, Ludovine is in the same boat. Can you describe that a little bit more, because it obviously hasn't quite made its way over the Atlantic to those of us here in the UK and Europe?
Well, yeah, so it started out as something I saw on my Threads stream, which is a TikTok video where a woman is asking her husband, they're just lying in bed and relaxing, and she asks him, if we had to leave our daughter in the woods, would you rather leave them with a bear or with a man? And the husband asks all sorts of questions. Well, what do we know about the bear? Are they aggressive? Are they hungry? What do we know about the man? Do we know them? And so forth. And it's like, no, you don't know anything about either the bear or the man. And so he goes through this process. He actually articulates the thought process and ends up going, well, actually, I'd probably be more comfortable with leaving them with a bear. And so she says, if you had a choice between leaving your daughter with a bear or a woman, which would you choose? And he immediately says, well, that's a no-brainer. I would leave them with the woman. And so it spurred this conversation. Of course, a lot of men saying, not all men are not me, and those kinds of things. But it spurred a deeper conversation about how vulnerable women are with men. And so when we think about mining, it's absolutely appropriate to think about, how we train men to respect the personal space, the auditory space of women to protect their safety and create a sense of belonging for everyone, not just for women, people of color, visible minorities, another group. So I think those kind of questions for me it's obviously a very provocative thing, at least on this side of the ocean.
Yeah, no, thank you for that explanation there, Kyle. I think that's really important. And yeah, I mean, I think even still now, I run lots of sessions with different, often smaller mining companies around the world. And it's interesting because sometimes when someone is brave enough to say, actually, I sometimes feel pretty vulnerable in that situation, you do get people rolling their eyes still during those sessions rather than going, oh, well, I'm concerned about that and I'm curious, tell me more. So we've still got a way to travel, perhaps, with regards to those aspects. Kyle, let's dive into, I loved your slide that you showed where it's, mining companies or people want the checkbox, but the reality is this. You had the picture of the human face with the kind of the back of the head fading off into the distance with different bits there. And I mean, I think this is something where a lot of us are involved in trying to put together, say, guidance with regards to be it sustainability or how do we look at our different mineral resources. And there's that tipping point between being very prescriptive with what you want everybody to do, so there's standardization, versus something that is more principle based. And so therefore it's flexible enough to fit into anybody's context. Do you want to just expand a little bit more on that? Because this flex backwards and forwards between the tick box or perhaps the standardization versus we all know the rules, so do what's intended, perhaps does flex. Have I interpreted what you were saying correctly, or am I on a different path?
No, absolutely. And I figured you'd like the checkbox because every time I've seen you and Matt and your team speak, you talk about checkboxes and moving beyond checkboxes. But the reality is that, most organizations are comprised of people who like and are comfortable making decisions, and other people who like and are comfortable having decisions made for them. And so the question around the change paradigm is, there's so many. One is how do you change that? But I think the most important part is where do you start? And the people who are most likely to start, I mean, sometimes you get surprised by people who will be expressive of an innovative approach, even though they're, fairly linear people and not terribly broadly minded. But I think the important part is to start the dialogue and have the conversations at different levels of companies.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, it's the whole chicken and egg, which is what changes behavior? Is it the policy, or does the behavior start or the conversation start first? And in reality, these are self-perpetuating machines. We just need to start intervening somewhere.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that this is something where, as someone who gets to play in the very, very exciting world of risk management on a regular basis, so routinely do we see, especially the larger companies, trying to check boxes and thinking just because they've ticked a box, they're now safe, or they're going to make the money or keep their social license or whatever it might be. Whereas actually risk management is almost the polar opposite to ticking boxes. It's actually the opportunity to open up some of that uncertain world and challenge it and try and think beyond those models. At least that's how I see it. Maybe that's why we always create chaos. But Kyle, thank you so, so much. Absolutely brilliant as always. Everyone, please put your hands together for the wonderful Kyle Pearce. Thank you very much. Awesome. So this then takes us to our last speaker of the day. So we've given you one Jeff already. Let me welcome to the stage another Jeff. Yes, this is Jeff Geipel, who's also spoken with us in the past on our Responsible Raw Materials conferences. But Jeff is my speed dial when it comes to anything to do with responsible sourcing or procurement or things going on with regards to the supply chain. So Jeff, I'm just going to spotlight you for everybody. If you have slides that you need to share, now is a good time to do it. And once we've got those up and sharing, I will lead everybody in a round of applause for the fabulous, and we're almost there, the one, the only. You can't catch them anywhere else at the moment whilst we turn these slides into their sharing mode. Yep, everybody, I give you Jeff Geipel, and we're still seeing the raw format at the moment.
There we go. Got it. How's my
Fantastic.
audio? It's fine?
Everyone, yep, and we can hear you. I give you
Perfect.
yes. There we go. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I really enjoyed speaking before and being invited to speak again. As Sarah mentioned, I talk about local procurement pretty much all day long. So I'm going to talk about that today, but I also kind of want to be a little more academic, I suppose, or more theoretical and talk about where local procurement fits in this current I guess, rush in the green transition, and these we're talking about raw materials, and everyone's talking about that and wants to access them. But I do think that as practitioners in whether they be a mining company, a consultant, we need to be mindful of where these best practices fit in the wider debates, and that's why I want to talk about local procurement and its role during the green transition and its relation to downstream beneficiation. So just really briefly, I run a program of engineers without borders of Canada called Mining Shared Value. And our entire mission is to push and help the global mining sector increase local procurement and, for that matter, responsible procurement in host countries and communities. And I should say I'm based in London myself. Actually, our whole team is out of London, even though we're a Canadian organization. But in any event, we help, we push when it comes to any actor trying to increase local procurement and responsible procurement by the mining sector. We're there to work with them. But I guess, in some ways I'm a little miffed because everyone is not talking about local procurement right now. They're all talking about downstream beneficiation and making battery components and signing new agreements to refine nickel in other countries. We've seen a lot of countries put in place bans on export of raw materials, and it's essentially a feeling of, I guess, being wrong that it doesn't make sense to export these materials raw. It doesn't make sense to export raw materials that we could be manufacturing into finished goods. And again, there is a bit of a sense of wrong where you mine the product, you send it raw to another country, and then it comes back to you at a higher price in the form of a consumer product. And so, of course, that makes sense. And what's going on now with the forward linkages from mining is that because of this green transition, because of the need for raw materials, copper, cobalt, developing countries rightfully are playing their hand and saying, look, you need these minerals. Why don't we get a better share? And I fully sympathize, and I think it's very fair to say that many of these host countries and communities, to a similar extent in advanced countries, have not seen the benefits of those millions and millions of dollars taken out of the earth beneath them. And so we've seen a number of policy changes, but I would even say at a higher level, if you go to any given mining event, mining Indaba or anything like this, the entire discussion has moved towards forward linkages and critical raw materials and getting those access and turning it into batteries and everything else. And that's great. We absolutely need that. But I want to, not just out of self-interest for my own topic, I want to kind of stress some of the pitfalls that come from this surge. And in fact, what I would argue, and I'll argue in this presentation, is that for many countries, and I'll be careful to say most, but most countries, it'll make more sense in the short term to focus on local procurement. And I'll present a couple tools at the end. But first, given the audience, I want to really stress that people who work here with mining companies directly or mining companies who work at them, when it comes to forward linkages, we need to remember that the mining sector is not made up mostly of companies who actually have control over this downstream beneficiation. Freeport-McMoRan is one company that is building a nickel smelter in Indonesia because of restrictions there, and that's actually one of the exceptions to the rule. There has been a very successful policy in Indonesia to some extent, but Freeport-McMoRan is not typical. Most large mining companies do not have control over the downstream beneficiation. Most gold mining companies do not refine their own gold in gold refineries. Those are carried out elsewhere. And so there's a bit of a mismatch between control and influence when it comes to whether forward linkages, the flavor of the day, can be actually influenced by mining companies. Linked to this, because these companies who engage in refining and smelting gold and all these other products, they're not usually the mining company, and therefore there's very little public reputational advantage for a mining company to engage in downstream beneficiation unless they own that smelter. So in the case of Freeport, yes, they do own the smelter in Indonesia, and they can brag about that to the government and to the public, but that's not the case with a lot of minerals. And so again, going back to reputation and the how a company can benefit from this surge, there isn't necessarily that much an advantage. And then linked to this, and I think probably the most important in terms of social licenses, downstream beneficiation processes are much more capital intensive rather than labor intensive. And so a smelter does not employ near as amount of jobs as a mine, and nor does it employ anywhere near the amount of jobs in the upstream goods and service suppliers to that mine. So, when we're talking about access to raw materials, the mining companies who want to access deposits and mine, and they want to use beneficiation jobs to make the case for their involvement, those jobs aren't necessarily made in a big way by downstream beneficiation. And most importantly, the jobs that do not take place where the social license matters the most, which is the mine itself. So you're not going to make a smelter in the middle of nowhere where the mine is, for lots of reasons, including transportation, but more importantly, because the market access of the finished product needs to have a port or a steady rail system, which is not necessarily going to be the case in the rural areas where mining takes place. And then again, I want to be really careful here because I am a structuralist in terms of economy. I do believe we should try to change. Which governments should intervene. They should steer. They shouldn't control, but they should steer the economy to where it should go. That's the historical record. But that said, what is realistic when it comes to forward linkages? It doesn't necessarily make sense for every country to try to be adding beneficiation to their minerals in the host countries where it takes place. There's a very famous quote by Kaplinsky who makes a paraphrase it here, but essentially the skills and capabilities that you use to mine iron have nothing to do with the skills and capabilities required to make pots. It's a very simple point, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about if we are, for example, trying to make battery metals in the DRC. Again, making batteries has nothing to do with mining copper in terms of the skills and capabilities. So I think it's a very perhaps a blunt point, but something that's important to remember. And again, I want to make sure that I'm not trying to say negative things about developing in low and high and middle income countries, because the reality is it's not necessarily about the skills and the capabilities of the countries. Australia exports most of its iron raw, even though Australians are among the most educated and high productive people in the world. They export most of their iron raw to China because the markets for steel are in China, not in Australia. Australia doesn't have a giant steel consuming economy, and therefore it's not a knock on Australia that they don't turn all their iron into steel, and they've made many efforts to try to do so with government support, and it hasn't worked per se. And then on the other side, Jamaica exports its raw bauxite because the cost of power is simply too high. It's not a comment on Jamaicans' capabilities or education. The price of power is simply too high in Jamaica for it to make sense to export bauxite into aluminum. And then I think another, what I found a really fascinating stat was the number 2 smelter of copper in the world has no mines. It's Japan. Japan is, we're talking again about having copper smelters and downstream beneficiation in countries like Zambia, but again, Japan has no copper mines, and yet it's number 2 smelter of copper, and that's because it has all the offtake. It has all the electronics industries who buy that copper. So again, it's about other factors than where the product is. And so that leads me back to my trumpet, which is to say, for the mining sector, and again, I think most people in the call will be sort of people in and around the mining, directly involved in mining. Local procurement is still the way for mining companies to benefit host communities and host countries during the green transition, and the way to secure the social license and smooth government relations. So, again, this is my standard slide. about 70% of all procurement spending goes to in-country spending goes to suppliers. This is a World Gold Council stat, but essentially you're looking at a 50 to 70% range depending on the industry. But again, when it comes to benefits, you see government taking 12% here and suppliers taking 71%. So again, if we're trying to influence our access to markets and where we can mine and social license, it makes sense for me to focus on the biggest potential piece of the pie there. And then going back to some of the pitfalls of downstream beneficiation is that local procurement is something that mining companies can change. They have control over the supply chains. They don't have control over the price of electricity, but they do have the ability to make preferential procurement processes to support certain businesses. Likewise, whenever a mining company does engage in local procurement, it's a huge social license benefit and a huge government relations benefit because they're doing the buying. They can make the claim correctly that they have benefited the economy, the jobs and tax revenue it's created. And so again, yes, mining companies should take heed of all these developments around forward linkages, but it's important to recognize that they don't have the ability to influence or to gain credit from some of those developments. And then likewise, as I said, the local procurement simply creates more jobs than forward linkages, and they create them where they matter most for social license, which is at the mine site or near the mine site. And then I think, again, I want to really stress that I'm not saying developing countries shouldn't try for forward linkages, but you should make a step to get there. And one of those steps could be to use local procurement as a means of building the capacities to then be used to make forward linkages, right? And to use a crude example, I won't name the country, but essentially we're working with a country right now where they're seeking to make forward linkages from mining. And the reality is they're not even at this current point making industrial scale food for the mines or basic, metal inputs, say grinding media, bolts, right? So again, you have to ask yourselves, if we're going to try to make battery components and batteries, and we can't make bolts competitively, that seems to be a mismatch. And I think, again, not to say they should try to make the battery metals, but why not start saying, well, let's make the bolts so that we can get better at making, fabrication steel, and then work our way towards things like building battery components. So again, just sort of to provide a tool, and a little rant, but just to provide a tool, our freely available tool for local procurement is called the Mining Local Procurement Reporting Mechanism, which we made with GIZ. It is essentially a tool to make procurement transparent, to share more information with suppliers, to empower them, and frankly, to gain credit, to make clear how many dollars are staying in the host community, in the host country. And essentially, it's just a framework that kind of asks you what you spend on local procurement, how you approach it, how you incentivize major contractors to also engage in local procurement, and other quantitative and qualitative information. It's currently being used by, I think this is a bit out of date, but 13 global mining companies, including Freeport. And again, here's an example of a mining company using it. It's very much like a GRI index, though you don't have to do it this way, but the Lundin Gold does choose to sort of report everything they do on local procurement in the report and then cover where it is in the report like a GRI index. And then finally, I'll just leave again with some concluding thoughts. One being that, yes, we still need to, I don't want to be taken as being sort of a laissez-faire, let things run. I think governments should try to change their competitive advantage to get into forward linkages, and that's what Japan did. Japan didn't have any copper mines, but it didn't have an electronics industry for that matter, but it put policies in place which made there be an offtake for the copper smelting. So they did change their competitive advantage. So I think companies should try to do that. But leverage does matter. Indonesia has leverage because of its huge nickel supply. It has markets with China. Botswana has leverage over the diamond market because it has most of De Beers diamonds access. So, it's something they could do, and not every country is going to be able to have that kind of leverage to then say demand that lithium be mined and processed in a given country because of downstream beneficiation. So I'll leave it there. I hope this helps the debate and companies engage with stakeholders around the topic. But like I say, in the meantime, local procurement is still the way to go to create social license and benefits. I'll leave it there.
Love it. Thank you very, very much, Jeff. Everyone, please put your hands together for the wonderful Jeff Geipel. Fantastic. There we go. Brilliant. So what we're going to do now, and we've only got 10 minutes left before we need to wrap up this session for today, but I'd like to bring all of our speakers who are still here with us at the moment and just do a quick lap around the room, because we've heard so many fantastic ideas, perspectives, concepts, opinions over the course of the last couple of hours. And I'd just like to raid all of the wonderful brains that we have around the room. Is there anything that you were surprised by, you were inspired by, or something that you disagreed with that we've heard over the course of the last few hours? I can see lots of people going, which is the don't come to me straight away while I think of something. But Murray, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you've been very active in the chat. Murray, from your perspective, is there anything that you would like to highlight from the last few hours? And then we'll go to Kyle.
So a whole bunch of the talks were really good. I guess the two that stood out in my mind, and probably it's because they're more recent. First was, well, the two Jeffs. So getting us to work as an industry to work and integrate better with government is absolutely spot on. Has to be done at multiple levels, multiple governments, from the local, whatever, town hall in Papua New Guinea up on the hilltop to Washington, D.C. and Whitehall. So good on you. All right, keep going. And then the last talk, I put the thing in the chat. Jeff, getting the local industry, or getting companies to actually invest in and support local production of materials for mine sites is so critical. And a lot of companies are trying to do it. There's no doubt about it, and they have been for a number of years. But getting that more out there and getting governments to understand that is important too, so they can help make that part of what companies really have to do. Everywhere from the exploration stage to closure is really, really important. Thanks, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Murray. Brilliant. Kyle, how about yourself? And then we're going to go to Jeff Geipel, because Jeff Townsend is still staring at the ceiling. So let's go to Kyle first.
Well, so many gems from all the presentations today, and I'm not going to call out anybody, but all I can say is I'm always impressed with the quality of conversation, the range and depth of analysis that people bring to this, and fundamentally, I'm looking at my screen and all these beautiful humans who've decided to make some kind of change in the world in an industry that doesn't really attract our kind of people quite easily. So I just want to say kudos to obviously the Responsible Raw Materials team, but also to all the speakers for the dedication and commitment you have to making the world a better place.
Oh, thank you very much, Kyle. That means a huge amount. Thank you. Jeff Geipel, do you want to come in with your thoughts, and then we'll go to Jeff Townsend. And I know that Carolina is still with us, but needs to leave at some point in time. But Carolina, just wave at me if you want to say something as well. Jeff Geipel, how about yourself?
Yeah, I might not have anything to add in particular. Just to say that I think it's really great to get more of these diverse voices in the same room. I think the advantage of being online is that we can do that. But I think we do need, in some ways, to find a better way to get this in person more. I think that we have this level of discussion we don't necessarily have, at NDAB or PDAC as much as we'd like. It's so rushed. So anyways, if we could find some way of convening this and digging a little deeper than superficial kind of ESG content at conferences. So kudos to you.
Oh, absolute pleasure, Jeff. And yeah, no, we're up for it, aren't we, Ludovine and team? So yeah, if anyone thinks that this would be a good addition to some of those other formats, etc., then let us know. We also do birthdays and weddings and general parties as well. People need to be entertained. Who knows? But awesome. Thank you very much, Jeff. That means a lot. And Master Townsend, sir, any takeaways from yourself?
Yeah, and it's a mixture of what I've heard over the last couple of days. So, earlier people were saying that they still weren't quite sure about the mining industry, still had some reservations about the mining industry. industry. And yet I look and listen to everyone today and throughout the conference. The industry is full of great people who want to change the world for the better, right? So I sit here and I go, wait, what's the mechanism? What's the mechanism that gets your voices, your brains, your drive and ambition to the outside world? So the world doesn't say, oh, mining, bad guys. The world says, oh, mining. This is the first stage of the fight against climate change. That's why I was looking at the ceiling, because I suddenly was trying to solve a big problem that I don't have the answer to yet. But I'm sure some of you guys do.
There you go. The challenge has been set. Thank you very much, Jeff. Awesome. Just to roll in some of the team that have been absolutely fantastic in making sure that everything's working behind the scenes. But Sophia, any takeaway comments from yourself? And then we'll go to Aileen.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Another awesome day, and it was great to be part of the discussion earlier today. I think maybe the thing that's going to stick with me was that idea of moving from a zero sum to abundance. And I think I've realized that it's not just those within the mining industry that needs to change their head mindset. I need to too. I think I'm slowly coming around to the idea that there is abundance there and there can be a win-win situation. I think I'm still looking for the next shoe to fall, you know, like what are they going to try and get from us next? And it's so funny that those sort of historical interpretations of an industry take a while to change, but I think we can all benefit from sort of moving into that abundance mindset. So really enjoyed that reminder today, and we'll echo Jeff and just saying, so interesting to hear from so many people who seem to have their hearts and minds in the right place. So excited to see what can happen when you all get together and get going. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Sophia. I think that, yeah, that kind of moment when you go, oh, they mean me. I have to do something. That's always a good realization for everyone to have. That's fantastic. Aileen, how about yourself? And then we'll finish off with Ludovine.
Yeah, no, just to say thank you to all the speakers from today. I think today was actually quite interesting because it was a little bit different in some ways from the focus of other days. And I think it was a lot more geopolitical and trying to look at the connections of all the different elements to that, but also bringing research perspectives. And I think it was really good at showing that we all have these really great systems and models of approaches, but we can all start to learn from each other. And I also think today in particular really emphasized the need to address expectation versus reality and doing that through communication from every level. And I think it was Susanna who said transparency at every level is really key. It's like, how can you improve what you don't know? And I think that was a really, really important point to bring back up that's come out throughout the conference as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Aileen. Great. And Ludovine.
Well, I mean, first of all, Jeff Townsend blows my mind every time I chat with him. So I'm going to start with that. But, you know, we were saying, okay, how do we follow through on all of this? Actually, we usually do. So every one of these ideas, particularly the ones that we understand less, I'm speaking for myself, that's what we take into whatever next project or engagement. These videos become part of what we also provide to the industry and to the people trying to understand it. So so that kind of follow through and being able to multiply the use of these conversations, in my view, is one of the most important parts of responsible raw materials. And I think the one thing that really struck me across all of this is that whilst we're talking about great big systems, every single time we also come back down to like individual people and their positioning and their changing of these systems. So I'm very grateful to each of the people who spoke here and what they're doing to change the system with us.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ludovine. And so with that, everybody, thank you so much for session number 5 that we've had at this year's Responsible Raw Material Conference. How awesome. It's been absolutely brilliant hearing from all of you. And the good news is we've still got another 3 sessions to go, folks. Oh, yeah. Is this a bit of a marathon rather than a sprint? We love it because this is all about bringing together as many of those different perspectives as possible. So for those of you who either don't like sleeping or are based in those time zones for which 8 a.m. UK time is okay, we'll be starting at 8 a.m. UK time tomorrow morning. And again, we've got a host of fabulous talks, including the one and only Marge Ryan, who works for Johnson Matthey. Now, if you want to be inspired by platinum group metals, this is the person to come and listen to. For those of you who are in different time zones and you're thinking, Sarah, there is absolutely no way I'm going to be awake at that time of day, don't worry, because I have a sneaking suspicion that our wonderful team behind the scenes from both Responsible Raw Materials and also Critical Productions will have that video edited and online, because yes, newsflash, all of the videos from this morning are already up online. So go and check them out. So we've got a fantastic set of talks for you tomorrow morning, starting off at 8 a.m. UK time. And then tomorrow afternoons, we kick off with Carolyn Burns and a whole range of fantastic speakers, including Jocelyn Fraser, Anne Thompson, Glenn Sigurdsson, etc. So we've got a fantastic lineup for you tomorrow afternoon as well. Come share your ideas, share your questions. Please do disagree with one another, because it's only through us coming together that we'll be able to make these step changes in this interdisciplinary style that we so desperately need. So with that, everybody, thank you very, very, very much. Have a lovely rest of your day and catch you tomorrow.